how many lawyers? How many of those?
All 70, 85.
85 lawyers.
85.
Wow. But and most of them are in India or
Some of them are in Palo Alto, some
in
in New York,
New
some
York?
in Singapore, Munich. 4 offices abroad we have,
Wow.
and stuff like that.
That's
But we, as I was in the,
good. Perfect.
so in the neighboring session, I was sitting there when I came to your session, and I was sitting to the other one, and I said we don't want some people in research and innovation.
Yeah.
Everyone has to do some amount of research, academics, and thought leadership.
Everyone.
Otherwise, they don't get recruited.
Really?
Yeah, because and that has really helped us because when innovators work, no, a research and development department, other people who bring revenue, they don't understand their importance.
Excuse me one second.
Oh,
Is Josh going to go out at the beginning today?
No, it's just you. So
Okay.
if you'll go out, they have a sponsor slide standing by.
So I'll go for a sec. Does he have any slides, Nasish? Because
No.
he said he might have given some to somebody, but we don't
You
have
don't
any.
have anything.
Okay. I guess we don't have your slides. I don't think we were given slides.
there was only one slide I thought it was possible to put, but if you can't put it, there, Arya told me that it's, huh?
She's talking to the producer.
They have some difficulty otherwise. And by the end of the
You do have a slide. Oh, good. Just a couple.
Just confirming. We went through this morning. Gives you
33 slides?
what do you,
He's got 33 slides for you.
no, only one or two out of that.
Would it be one of the
only
first
the
ones?
imaginarium I can just show. So
Would it be
people-
one of the first ones? Because
you see, if you need time to organize, then I can do it last.
Say it one more time, I'm sorry.
If it is not possible to do first, then I can do it at the end. So you got 10-15 minutes to organize to put.
no, but he only that can't be done. But just because of the nature of the technology.
So you can.
Do you know where the Imaginarium slide is in the deck? How far in it is?
Arya knows that.
Otherwise, we can give him a clicker and he can like.
Let's give him a clicker and we'll just see what we can do. If we have to click
But you
through
just tell me when I should do that.
you
But I
can just
think
click
towards
through
the
some-
end, I will do it. That will be better. So we have some time. And it's 20 minits, not David?
20 minutes, yeah.
20 minutes. So about, yeah.
And then you can control
Oh, this will be, as in when I want, right?
when you want. Yeah.
So
Be up there talking.
Oh, this
so
is perfect.
Nishit, in about a minute, I'm going to go out and just say make a few.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, good morning. What's my electronics are stabbing me here. Welcome, everybody. The last morning of Techonomy is always sort of a magical opportunity to reflect and to, in my case, feel some degree of relief. And I think in this case, we've had a pretty interesting set of discussions. If our breakfast this morning is any indication, people's minds have been planted with a lot of pretty interesting thoughts. And that breakfast was entirely about what do we do about the platforms that we've criticized so healthily or unhealthily up on this stage. But we've gotten a lot of other great insights. So many people have commented about various sessions, and I've been very gratified by that. So I don't really have too much more to say. Maybe what I would do, since I apparently have 4 minutes on the clock, does anybody have anything they would like to just say to reflect on what we've heard so far? I would find that interesting. But it's certainly not required, and I know it's first thing in the morning. Okay, Ken, who is one of our most long-standing techonomists. We probably don't even have a mic runner at the moment. So
I have a big voice.
here,
You guys all hear me?
the mic is coming. Thank you.
I won't scream my big voice into the mic. So, David, I wanted to reflect on a couple things. One is the diversity and quality of the presentations and the dialogue and the topics have been absolutely amazing. And so I wanted to mention that because it's one thing to have a rich dialogue about artificial intelligence or a rich dialogue about quantum computing, but it's another to have a rich dialogue about AI, quantum computing, the policies and to advance it, the legal ecosystems, and I mean I could just go on.
Self-driving
and on.
cars.
The self-driving cars, I could go on and on. And so I just wanted to publicly applaud you and the team for
Thank you.
bringing us such a rich and diverse set of pertinent, really important, meaty topics to dialogue about. And I encourage you to continue to do that in the years to come.
Thank you, Ken. And you know, Ken also, I will just to be fair to him and unfair to myself, or fair to myself, he also told me this morning it was a little relentlessly overpacked. So thank you, Ken, for saying that also, and we can all do better. But anyway, I appreciate that, and that's a nice and generous way to start. But let me now bring up Nishith Desai to start the day. Oops. Yes, the technology is...
It's slippery slope.
Here, put it somewhere. Okay, hold on to that.
Anyway,
Nishith
you.
is India's leading technology lawyer. His law firm, Nishith Desai Associates, which is headquartered in Mumbai, is the premier firm that helps global firms enter the Indian market and understand what's happening with technology in India. They have offices in Palo Alto, in New York, in Munich, and in Singapore. Nishith has been here for the entire conference with some of his colleagues. To be honest, another thing I would fault myself and this conference for is it's not international enough. So the fact that we have Nishith is helpful, but we would love to have more representatives from around the world. And so what we're going to do, though, here is talk a little bit about his work and India and how it differs from what we know and what we can expect from it. And I've asked Nishith to just start out by give a few reflections of what he's heard here and what he's doing and what we ought to know about India.
I think India
You got to hold this up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
Yeah, it doesn't work. I don't
the
think.
technology doesn't work at last minute, you know. Anyway, so good morning. And I think we are at the cusp, we are at the runway, I would say, on that becoming kind of a technology powerhouse in many ways.
India, yeah.
India, yeah. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think, of course, genetically also, civilization has been there for a long time. So it's a cycle we went through, downturn cycle. Now they are going on the upside. And second thing, as you everyone know, that zero was invented in India, by the way, by Aryabhatta. He's a mathematician. And I think if zero would not have been invented, half of the digital world would not have been there, because 0 and 1, right? So, so we contribute, we have contributed 0 to the world, but at the same time it comprises half the thing. So I think we are looking at a number of things. One of the interesting things is that India is a large market, but at the same time, so the scalability is very high, and the cost of failure is low. So that allows you to experiment with a lot of things. Today, most of the R happens in the West here, and D happens in India. It is just beginning to happen. I think this is what I'm looking at. A lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of new ideas are coming up. But in every system, you start with Me Too companies. Me Too in the context of, don't get me wrong.
No. Copycat companies.
Yeah. And then you start becoming innovator and stuff like that. So we'll look at next 8-10 years to, now we'll be on the cusp. India is trying to develop itself into an entrepreneurial economy, because job creation is going to be challenged for India. Manufacturing is not that much a forte for India, just like China. It's going to be more of a service economy, just like the US. And there's so much to do in that. And even if you look at pharma, biotech, the patient pool available in India, maybe if you're one person to do clinical trial here, you might get 50. Even doctors do excellent job, because when they are students, they actually work and experiment on the real dead bodies, not artificial. Because the dead bodies are available in ample number. Whether we like it or not, it's a fact. Because so many bodies which are found, they are poor people, they don't have, and they're in the hospital. So students really get a real experience when they are. So
Hopefully that opportunity will diminish with time, yes.
Oh, of course. And I think, but the experience that is built up, I think, will be very helpful. And we see that this is, and again, as you know, with China, US, the political, economic relations that are happening, I think India has some opportunity to play a very important role, and we can talk about it if separately. But I think India, another advantage we have is that we have freedom of speech and expression. It's a democracy. And that is why, we are able to express ourselves fully. If anybody would ask me who runs the country, is it the government? I would say probably yes, but really speaking, it's the judiciary. So whether it's pollution, whether it is privacy, whether it is LGBT issues, all these have been addressed by Supreme Court of India. And very modern, dynamic view that has been taken by the court in all this regard. They are not thinking backwards, they are thinking forward. So all these things, India has been liberated in many ways. And that is what gives me a lot of hope that India has an opportunity and potential to become some kind of a tech powerhouse.
Well, you heard John Chambers say on stage on Sunday that he sees India ultimately being an even bigger opportunity than China, maybe getting its act together better in time. Does that make any sense to you, or is it, China has the advantages of command and control. It has a tremendous technological head start, so to speak, in many areas. When you see the two countries competing and in many ways cooperating, how do you see that relationship evolving, and how do you see India's capabilities vis-a-vis China's?
I think it's simple as this, that command and control, system works for a shorter period of time, and especially more so with the revolution in the digital area, aspirations of people go up. So it is not easy to contain the discontent in that sense. So at some point in time, if there are infirmities in the Chinese system, they would begin to show up. Already to some extent it is happening. Even in Hong Kong you can see, and people in China would also learn about what people are doing in Hong Kong. Nobody ever thought that this kind of protest would happen in Hong Kong, right? Whereas in India, we see this every day. So we are so used to think, okay, it's happening, it's okay, bye, pass by. You can shout anything against the Prime Minister, President on the road, and say, don't, if you want to shout, go on the side, let my car move forward, That's a kind of often reaction, we see that. So it's a very different society, and there are no absolutes in the world. There are some advantages of perhaps command and control, so they can drive the way they want to. But I think the democracy allows us to express on a timely basis if things are not going right. And the press is very, very free in India. In fact, it is half the time anti-establishment. And that is the beauty of India. So, the court system, the problem with court system is that settle with millions of cases. So it takes long time and delays and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, when the important issues, Supreme Court would take them out of turn and address them.
So you said you wanted to talk about the future of democracy, but so that's a way of expressing optimism about democracy. It is interesting about India and the United States. We essentially come from the same legal genetic stock, so to speak, right? We both were created our systems around a British model. And so there are things that Americans can understand about India. But so you really don't worry about democracy's future in India at the macro level?
Well, see, whether worried or concerned, I think there are two slightly different issues. I'm concerned about the democracy, the way in which it evolves on a global basis, not just India. And this is my pet project, that even 20, 30 years' time, we can change the entire model of democracy. First of all, we need to define what do you mean by democracy. Is it rule of majority? And does it happen that way? We have members of parliament, senators, they have power of attorney to vote on our behalf for 5 years, and you cannot do anything in the interim. Even if majority of his constituency believes in something, he will go and vote other way. So you don't have control. I think we need to give control back to, and it's my favorite subject, because I think technology is the best instrument to disintermediate. So can we have a model, a new model? Original model for democracy or the concept began to happen in 500 BC with Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and people like that. And then it was Athenian style democracy. Then it was, I think, 2,000 years ago. And in 930, country called Iceland at first representative of democracy. And that's where it began to happen, Now 1,100 years have gone by. We all sit together and find out we have to change the business model, Because once you give this kind of power of attorney, you have no control. So in 5 years' time, if we can have a technology whereby you can vote on the phone, and phone can tell you you're in a secured environment, nobody's putting gun on you, you're stress-free and stuff like that, you can vote on any issue that you want to. Now, maybe you cannot vote on hundreds of issues because you don't have time, but at the same time, on few things that you want to vote, you can take back your power at that point of time, what you often call liquid democracy. And that is the system we'll have to go. We'll have to give power back to the people. I believe individual sovereignty will, over a period of time, override the state sovereignty. I also am not a great believer in the theory of state, if you ask me. But a nation is slightly different. New nations will evolve just as old ones happen around the river banks and these communities happen on river banks and then in highways, and now we'll have internet highways. So new countries may be formed. I believe 2,000 nations may be in the coming up in the next century. So these are some of the esoteric things. But the reason I'm telling is that, today it is going to be very different environment in next 5, 10, 15 years. And we need to remodel the democracy. A lot of diseases have gone into the whole system. And how can we use technology to change the world for the better? And democracy fundamentally is a good thing. But if those ages that have been rough in some years, I think we have to work together. I'll be very happy to.
So, well, one of the things that's certainly pertinent to this question is what we've talked about so much on this stage about the tech platforms and the speech problems that have emerged and how that has, in many people's opinion, distorted democracy. Does that worry you in the Indian context?
Well, in a way, yes. In a way, no. Because I'm an eternal optimist. So, we can. But it is for us to find some major solutions on a timely basis. And if we do that, I think it's not so much worrying. One of the most important things that worries me is that yesterday there was a presentation on killer weapons.
I'm just going to put this down because it doesn't look good for the video.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Keep going.
I'm loud anyway.
Oh.
So,
very nicely dressed, so go ahead.
But I believe that some of those things which really worry me, that we have to come together to see how technology is used for the good and not for the bad. And as I was mentioning, that even I hope that we will have parliament in the cloud. We don't need this heavy expenditure on the physical infrastructure and all those kind of things. Can we not create parliament in the cloud? What is the job of parliament? To develop laws. And in every law, there are three parts, First part is definition, second is operational, and third part is penalties and prosecution. 1/3 of the job is already done by Wikipedia. Can we not do crowdsourcing of the meanings of the words or whatever you use in the law? Similarly, operational thing, which issue should go to parliament? Today, it's all perception-based. Member of parliament or senator or somebody would take lead and go and introduce a legislation. It should be data-driven. What is more important to public is often not known to the intermediary, the MP, So we can have a system whereby, we use big data or other kind of thing and find out what are the true priorities of the people rather than going by perception. So there are a lot of things that we can do, and I think you all are most influential people in the world, and we can work together something whereby we continue with the democracy and perhaps move towards what is called netocracy, if you want to use that word. We have to be on the top of the thing because the speed at which the things are happening, if we are not agile, I think it can derail us.
Well, it's satisfying to have a little of that kind of optimism on this stage. I think we've somewhat lacked it up until now, so thank you. But I also want to, and by the way, if anybody has questions, I want to ask one more thing, but I'd love to hear from you all. When you say we'll see possibly 2,000 countries, is that a way, one of the things that came up in our breakfast just now is Jody, who had spoken on the stage on Sunday, was saying, she's a psychologist, sociologist, she does a lot of study of the ethics, but the basic human impulse is tribal, right?
Yeah.
And she uses that to help explain a lot of what we've seen with fake speech and its consequences, and that we should have known that if we had an interconnected world, people would connect with those like themselves and reinforce their views. Is that sort of another way of what you're saying, that these will be more tribally discrete entities which always were there but were, for whatever reason, colonialism, others, broken up by historical factors?
I think it is bound to happen. That's what is my feel. Because as you see, there is already a lot of breakups. Like from USSR, we had a number of countries come up. India had 14 states when we got independence. Today we have over 30, and still demand is there. Because aspirations of the people are rising, and therefore people would demand different kind of mechanism to address their problems. So as I mentioned, that theory of state will slowly give way to theory of nation to some extent. Nation is slightly different than the theory and the state, because geography is becoming slowly, slowly at least irrelevant in many ways. And for hundreds of years we fought so many wars, killed so many people to acquire territories. After acquiring territories, now what we do, we sell it to a company, and the shareholders of the company are my former enemies. So I'm still giving back. So what is the use of fighting? Because in the war, only companies win, not the countries, So I think what I assume is that the new nations will be built, as you said, tribal nations, let us put it in that sense, along the internet highway, rather than on the,
I'm glad you answered that. You've got a question over here. Please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Bhushan Joshi. I'm with Ericsson. Nishit, great to have you on the stage, and someone from my hometown, Mumbai. So great to have you. Question for you. India is the largest population in the world now, maybe right behind China, or we're going to overtake them pretty soon. When it comes to sustainable development, the population that we have, can you talk about how this democracy 2.0 that you're thinking about and the population that India has, what is the path for sustainable development for India?
And should I, before you answer, I would note that Bhushan, me, and you all have our SDG pins on, which is the way to advocate sustainable development. So go ahead.
I think, let me put it in one word, if something is not sustainable, it will not sustain, number one. And therefore, everything you do has to have some kind of an impact. Even in the fund industry, I see, at one point of time, we had different asset classes, private equity fund, VC, these, that, and impact fund. Now, the situation is that every fund has to show impact. If you're not causing an impact, I think LPs are not willing to fund you. So, impact is going to be the thing. How you manage the impact is different. It's so long, so far we thought, okay, only social NGOs will cause impact. But now it's the private sector that has to take a lead. One theory on which one premise on which I'm working on is what is called private property for public good. And there's a lot of talk going around the world that 1% of the population owns 99% of the wealth of the country. So to me, owning a wealth is not per se an issue. How you use it, and that is where we need to put more emphasis. And we have to really think how the future is going to unfold. And of course, we have to really look to the future and work. Maybe I can spend a minute.
Yeah, just a minute. That's what we have, 1 minute.
How much? One? Okay. So, as a law firm, we are into advanced predictive legal practice. And what we try to do, we look to the new technologies, new social development, political development that would be happening over the next 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And try to visualize what will be the future legal, regulatory, tax, and ethical issues that will be coming up. And we have to do that when you have proof of concept of a new technology, not when technology is already there and it's being either abused or, some other problems come up, then government reacts. So we should simultaneously, when proof of concept for any technology or product comes up, immediately we should see what are the kind of regulatory or even the self-managed ethics that would be required, and I think that is something that we can.
And I know you've done that with things like blockchain. You immediately put together teams to try to understand what it would mean if it were to expand, and
right.
et cetera. And I just want to say one thing, because I know you had slides which we don't have time for now, but among other things, Nishith in his firm has built a spectacular campus for conferences and other kinds of meetings in Mumbai. It really looks like a university campus with meeting houses. We have, there's a little bit of it, okay.
Yeah, it's
right
working.
there.
Technology works.
Looks like the White House from here.
So this is our campus in Mumbai, and all of you are welcome. This is called an imaginarium, like planetarium, aquarium, museum, just to imagine and dream the world, to change the world for the better. And So these are it's completely IoT driven, and I'm not going to walk you through all that, but this just gives you a very quick snapshot of what it is, and it is a private property for public good. So we don't rent out to anybody, but if you have a good purpose and good people behind, most welcome. We would love to collaborate with each one of you here and do something interesting, exciting. Let's change the world for the better, as I always say, and shape the world that we want to. Thank you.
So much. So glad that you were able to get time for that. Thank you so much. Let's bring all the technology with us here. Could you just hold that? I'll take this.
Okay,
No, don't. You can take it off backstage. Here, just hold that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage founding partner of Innovation Endeavors, and CEO of Plenty, Matt Farmer, with founder and chairman of CDX, Drew Ion.
All right. Good morning. Good morning. There we go. Now we're talking. Some late parties last night, so I appreciate all you early risers and the folks that were in the breakfast sessions, and extra congratulations as well. That was 7:15 was tough. But it's great to be here. I'm very excited about this session. We're gonna jump right in. A quick backstory. Molly Starr, who's somewhere here, when I used to work when I was at AdTech, as the chairman of AdTech, she was at Pandora and getting great speakers, and she's running comms now for Innovation Endeavors, and she hit me up and said, "Have you heard about the super revolution?" And it was great to have Harpy Singh at our New York CDX event to talk about the super revolution, and I was fascinated by it and read a lot about it, and very excited to jump in here. And we have Matt, who's one of the portfolio companies of Innovation Endeavors. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do very brief introductions. Dror, we'll start with you, who you are, what is Innovation Endeavors, and we'll come down the line and jump right in.
Sure. So I'm Dror Berman. I'm a founding partner of Innovation Endeavors. I started the firm with Eric Schmidt back when he was the CEO of Google, really to focus on entrepreneurs solving some of the most important problems that humanity is going to face through technology. We've been very focused on some of the cutting-edge technologies, mostly around instrumentation, compute, and robotics, as they are being applied to some of the most important domains, things like life sciences, agriculture, space, materials, and so on and so forth.
That's great.
Matt Bernard, I'm one of the founders and CEO of Plenty. And at Plenty, what we've been working on over the last 5 years is to bring the farm inside, turn the farm into a platform, all towards the end of being able to grow anywhere where there is people, water, and power, and doing so with food that tastes better than people have ever had before, and with a level of purity that's unachievable out in the field in the greenhouse. So there's a very high efficiency farms, and that's what we're doing at Plenty.
That's great. Before we jump into the super revolution and your case study and experiences, I always like to start, because there are a lot of people who come here from out of town, the state of the valley. It's been quite a year for tech, big tech, both good and bad. I'm a Valley native, and it's always interesting to see the cycles over the 50 years that I've either lived here or been coming back. Dror, I'll start with you. What is your sense about the state of Silicon Valley today, and whether it's the amount of money that's available? Is there still a lot on the sidelines? Is there still excitement as we get into data and privacy? Is there more consternation and pause? But how do you feel about the state of the valley?
Sure. So I'm very excited. It's been I've been doing what I'm doing now for 10 years now, and I can say that it's been trending into much more interesting directions throughout this time. One of the most interesting trends that we see is that more and more entrepreneurs are actually starting to build mission-driven companies. Companies actually focus on solving some of the most important issues that, again, we are facing we're facing now, or we're going to face as humanity. There are many examples that we are seeing. Companies like Plenty, for example, or Farmers Ridge, thinking about new approaches to, or new architectures to grow food that would be much more sustainable, much more affordable, and really sort of a completely level of quality that we've been used to so far. Companies like Planet Labs, for example, they've been really building a new way for us to observe what's going on around the world on a daily basis. And so we see this trend. We've been seeing this trend for a while, but I can say that maybe more so than now, more founders are thinking about how do we really work on a very important problem and not just sort of trying to optimize an Excel spreadsheet, right? And that's becoming more apparent now. The other things that we are seeing that are interesting, I can say that one of the things that we've been fascinated by is really the availability of capital that has come to the valley over the last few years. really allows those entrepreneurs to be much more audacious than ever before. So we see an increasing number of companies, maybe Matt is going to talk about it later, not just thinking about building technology and selling it to the large corporates, but really thinking about how do we actually raise enough money to go and build what we call a full stack company, an end-to-end solution, and go and actually compete with incumbents and build a big company around it. And then the last trend that we've been seeing is given everything that I've said, is that the large corporates are really trying to move in earlier and interact or engage with startups. And so for us, we've been finding new ways to partner with large corporates such that they can actually partner with those entrepreneurs early on.
That's great. Matt, how do you feel, the state of the Valley, and especially as an entrepreneur?
Well, Dror took most of what's good to say relative to what's happening in the Valley. But I'll say, plenty, I don't know that we're positioned to speak for the Valley as a whole, but as we focus on our technologies and our platform, we see more and more of what we're doing around the Valley as well, which is the focus on the physical world, which Dror was hinting at, and what we can do to help move industries that have been hard to move with the technologies of Silicon Valley to a very different place. In our case, that means delivering more nutrients to more people in ways that are more accessible and approachable, in ways that are more energy efficient and resource efficient. So that focus on the physical world is a theme that we seem to see increasing. And one that we're certainly excited to be a part of.
That's great. And my bit of editorializing there, being a Valley native, is we spent 3 days here talking about a lot of the problems that are huge and very real, and I agree with that. But if you're here a lot, or if you get certain newsletters and read certain blogs, there's a lot of great things happening. There are a lot of entrepreneurs really trying to change things for the better in the Valley, and I think that needs to be noted as we sit in our state of luxurious despair at the Ritz-Carlton Half Moon.
Yeah, I think what you find in a lot of those companies is that as you build a mission-driven company, it actually makes things much easier. It's much easier to recruit. It's much easier to think big and sort of long-term. And I think a lot more entrepreneurs are starting to find that they're attracted to it. So if you've made enough money, if you sort of worked at some of the big social networks around here, and you want to do something next, you want to do something meaningful.
Right, I agree. Well, let's dig in. Dror, share with us the super evolution and communicate to our audience the theory and the thesis behind the super evolution. What is it, and what is its sort of long-term impact?
Sure. So Eric and I coined the term back in 2010. We were looking at really what's going on in the world and noticing that by 2050 we're going to have some serious problems here with regard to population increasing, climate change, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, we were looking at the pace of innovation that was really happening, taking place in a lot of those industries, and we sort of came to the conclusion that pace, the sort of linear pace of innovation, was not going to be enough to actually help us face those issues. And as we were looking at it, we were also noticing some of the technologies that were emerging and starting to converge, things like instrumentation or data being generated now at amounts that we've never seen before, the innovation in compute and innovation across engineering. And what we noticed was that a lot of those were coming together and converging to create what we saw as a period of radical change or radical acceleration of those industries. To give more context, if you think about innovation cycles in a lot of those industries like agriculture, like life sciences, space, and so on and so forth, we've done the same thing for basically since the dawn of humanity, right? There's always been a human in a process. Those have all been driven by humans, where a scientist generally would go through a design, build, test cycle, and he or she would do it based on a certain hypothesis, and they would run an experiment, see what happened, and then basically design the next experiment based on that. And obviously that was very, very limited in scope, and in sort of it was a very expensive process, which means that in a lot of the most important industries, such as agriculture, it really took sometimes decades and billions of dollars to reach a step function improvement. And what got us excited is that we understood that this is all changing now, because this is now starting to become driven by machines. We can have machines design almost infinite number of experiments to be run at the same time. Those could be done basically more effectively and more efficiently, but actually more creatively than humans, because we have no human bias, or machines have no human bias. We can then basically run those experiments, again, much faster and much more cost-effective way through some of the innovation we've seen in automation and robotics. And then we can use instrumentation to read all the data that is being generated through those experiments and feed it back into a central system, central software basically, that keeps looking at everything that worked and everything that didn't work, and can look at millions or billions of data points from previous experiments, and essentially use machine learning to infer what kind of experiments we want to run next. And really, that has been allowing us increasingly to do things at a completely different scale and a fraction of the time and cost. Right? If you think about it, in some of those experiments, and I'm hoping that Matt can talk about it today, we can run 1,000x more experiments at a 1,000th of the cost and time. Right? And that literally allows us to collapse time in some of those industries, which we call the super evolution. Right? And we are seeing that now being manifested in industries such as agriculture, in life sciences, in space, and in many, many other industries.
Yeah, I think the collapse of time is a really interesting sort of philosophy and what it means. Talk to us about, how did you, connect with innovation? Did you hear about the super evolution theory and say, hey, that's us, and should we connect? And how did you guys get together? And then what does the super evolution theory mean to you and your company?
Yeah, we first connected with Innovation Endeavors because I have a long-standing relationship both through business school and through an industry that we used to work in with one of the partners at Innovation Endeavors. And so I went to him. He has a great strategic mind. Went to him for counsel, and what started as counsel turned into an unintentional pitch. And so over a period of months or half a year or so, we ended up as partners.
That's great.
So that's how we hooked up. But then a part of it is because what we were focused on, and that's the super evolution theory for Innovation Endeavors, aligns so well. Because at Plenty, we are collapsing time in quite a few ways. And if you think about the first business or the first set of things we're applying our platform and our farms towards, it is fruits and vegetables or nutrient-rich foods. The hierarchy of the human diet is calories, then protein, and then nutrients. And so we believe that this last thing to solve is nutrients, and that's where the next revolution will be. But as you look at the human diet over time, it's changed quite a bit over the last couple hundred years. And as it relates to nutrient-rich food or fruits and vegetables, almost every single thing that you can find in the grocery store is very different today than it was even 50 years ago, much less 100 or 200 years ago. If you crack a watermelon open 200 years ago, it would look nothing like you would expect a watermelon to look. That white pith that you cut off, the whole thing was white pith. There are crops, strawberries were tiny, and you had to eat them as soon as you picked them because they squashed in your hand when you picked them. So, it's just, all these crops have been optimized for both an industrialized growing format out in the field, as well as thousands of miles and weeks, and sometimes even months in the supply chain. So what we're doing at Plenty is now collapsing what was already a very innovative field, given the constraints, right? So you have to learn year over year. And at Plenty, we now get to learn week over week and month over month, as opposed to year over year. And so because we're now getting 40 growing cycles in the space of a year, because
and 40 as opposed to what typically maybe?
Call it 1 to 3 for the types of crops we're talking about.
You moved to 40.
That's right. That's right. So, and it keeps rising. When we first started talking with Innovation Endeavors, we were at between 9 and 16, depending on what crop we're talking about, and now we're around 40 and rising.
And what specifically has driven that? Is it the ubiquitous computing and edge? Is it data innovation? Is it, what specifically has allowed you to go from 3 to 9 to 40?
Well, it's a whole soup of things. One is just getting better at what we do. One is all of that data that Dror was talking about that allow us to understand the photosynthetic rate much more deeply and how to influence it. I'll tell you a story from a couple years ago, where as we were pushing plants harder and harder, part of one of our farms started to die, and we didn't understand why. And we had an emergency room that we set up that we had rank prioritized a couple dozen hypotheses as to what was happening. We assigned people to each of them, and then we gathered several times a day, and we're rapidly running tests to figure it out. And what's interesting here is a story both about rapid learning, covering ground that's never been covered before, and also human bias, where our world-class plant science team was systematically ignoring what our own machine learning apps were telling us was true, because established plant science where the control over the photosynthetic rate was never something that was in people's grasp, would suggest that the things the plants were asking for, they should not be asking for. In fact, they were asking for them because we weren't giving it to them, they were becoming weak and susceptible to disease. So we were pushing them to just a place they've never been before. And we continue to do that. And so without the machines, as Dror put it, without these machine learning apps that we had written, without the fields of data science where they are in 2019, or 2017 as the case was then, we wouldn't have been able to figure that one out.
I'd like to go to the audience. Ultimately, this is for you. So we have some mics. Any questions out here? Have some questions in the back. If you could introduce yourself as well, thank you.
My name is Kitty. I work for the Aspen Institute. What kind of crops and do you really are you really successful at? And are they engineered in a way that you will have detractors saying, forget it, these are pioneered plants, they're not natural to the system, et cetera, and so forth? What are your biggest obstacles to the public? And can we find any of your crops in the grocery store today?
You can. So a couple things there. I think there were a couple questions there. One is, what crops do we grow? That answer changes quarter over quarter and year over year. So we have grown over 1,000 edible cultivars in our farms and test farms over the last 18 or so months. So we've grown a lot. And then the question becomes, what can we grow economically and sell at grocery store prices? And that answer, as I said, is changing and growing quarter over quarter and year over year. So the first crops we have commercialized are leafy green crops. There are a couple things that are true about those. Almost all of the plant is edible. And there are a couple other things that are true that make them more economic. And the next crop and crop type that we will be commercializing here in a matter of months is strawberries. So berries are our next crop. And following that, we have other types of fruits like tomatoes, as well as some vegetables and root crops. So as the farms become more efficient, and here I'll tell a quick anecdote to illuminate that. Because of the effectiveness of the learning that we're able to apply to the plants, the farm is now a platform. We version the platform year over year. The version that we released this year drove about 80% of the energy out of the farm relative upon a per kilogram basis. It drove about 85% of the work hours out of the farm. And we see this year over year, this march of more productivity, more efficiency. And what that does is it pushes more and more crops into that economic realm. And so you can find us today at places like Safeway, where actually today is the day that we just showed up at Safeway. And Good Eggs and a few other places. So that every month that's changing too.
That's great. Any questions here? I have a slightly off-script question. And we had a great conversation the other day on quantum computing. Dror, I'll start with you. We talk about the collapse of time and the super evolution. Where does quantum computing sort of fit into that? And does that run parallel? Is it in complement to a super evolution theory? Do you have your own personal thoughts on sort of quantum computing and where that could help companies like Plenty or companies in your portfolio? There's still a lot of confusion around quantum computing.
Yeah, if you think about the core of the super evolution, right, there are almost three different aspects, right? You have the compute that allows you to design experiments at a different scale. Then you have the engineering aspect, right? And there's a variety of things that are happening from an engineering perspective that allow us to execute sort of really right into the physical world, the biological world, what we think is possible. And then there is instrumentation or data aspect, right? That is more about reading what's going on in the world. Compute is essentially a very important part of it. And in a lot of those industries, for example, in material science, for example, there's still a bunch of problems that we can't really solve through the compute power we have today. So we see quantum computing as a sort of as a next generation capability or a platform that would exist. We've been observing and investing in the space. We're excited about what's coming next. We think that in the next probably 5 years, we'll bring not only a new capabilities from a technology perspective, but actually more of the industry into it as well, because the industry is not ready to absorb this kind of capability yet. You have to write algorithms differently. You have to really build the interface to really allow the market to interface with this new technology. So we think our timeline is about 5 years. We've been very excited. There are different approaches to it, and Google just announced a significant breakthrough. And so we think whether it's Google or we actually have a portfolio company called Atom Computing that is taking a completely new approach called neutral atoms. We think that one of those companies are already in the race. Will probably develop. We'll see more breakthroughs over the next couple of years.
That's great. I'm about out of time here, so my parting question is always like to give some actionable sort of advice or valuable information to the audience. What do you guys read to stay on top of things, whether it's specifically about these issues that are related to the super evolution, just what's happening in the Valley, different companies that are getting funded, something maybe obscure if there's an interesting blog that you read, or who do you read? What do you read? Any advice for the audience on some?
We try to spend as much time as possible with entrepreneurs. We believe that entrepreneurs are really living in the edge and innovating at a pace again that it would be very hard for us to wait until we can read about it. So our motto is, by the time you can actually read about it, it's probably too late. So we try to engage as early as possible, work entrepreneur at the edge of the network. And I would say we found very creative ways to work with partners on the corporate side to help them get up to speed much more quickly. So we have actually designed and launched several initiatives in areas like life sciences, like agriculture, supply chain logistics, and so on, where we create more as a convening entity that brings together all the largest companies around the world and allow them to engage with startups in a more meaningful way for them, but also for the startups.
What do you read, or how do you stay on top of things in terms of technology innovation and things like that?
Yeah, we find my answer is somewhat similar to George's in that we find it both through the recruiting process. We also find it now. We're in the fortunate position of being a target of other young teams that have recently formed or have developed technologies that might be relevant to us. And so it's really staying active in the community that keeps us abreast of what's happening. We found that to be the most productive.
That's great. Well, this was a great conversation. I wish we had another 15 minutes. A round of applause for our panelists here, please. That's great. We'll go this way.
Please welcome back to the stage, David Kirkpatrick.
Thank you so much. And let me welcome to the stage Andy Kessler. And while he's coming up, I just want to remind everybody we're going to close with David Plouffe. So please, Andy, sit down as the chairs are being removed, the chair. And David Plouffe is going to be quite fascinating, I can tell you right now. So Andy, you are a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, a longtime investor, somebody I've known for a long time. And you're sort of much more of a skeptical mind, a libertarian thinker, a very pro-capitalist essayist. And you've been here, and we've heard a lot of people talk about a lot of things that might be even said to be anti-capitalist in some people's view. How do you assess what you've heard here? What do you think about that? And I know in your mind, we should talk about Section 230, and that's something I want you to talk about as a factor behind a lot of what's going on. So combine all that into an answer if you can. Sorry.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. David, you're the hardest working guy in rock and roll. I mean, we've known each other 20, 25 years. I used to come to New York, and we'd sit in this small New York restaurant, and I would talk, and you would take meticulous notes. I go, what the heck are you doing? And then you'd run it through your neural network upstairs and turn out great ideas in conferences like this. So thank you for that. My view is the talk about regulation of Silicon Valley and of big tech is very misguided. In fact, you heard Martin Sorrell yesterday morning saying, be careful what you wish for. We saw with GDPR in Europe that it locked in the incumbents, and a lot of smaller companies in Silicon Valley that might have gone to Europe didn't. So let's take a little walk backwards, a little history that most people don't know, and that is about this Section 230, that many are talking about. Let's just repeal Section 230. It allows companies and big tech companies to get rid of what they don't want on their platforms.
Yeah, it reduces them, it exempts them from liability for the content that flows across their pipes on the theory that they are simply platforms.
Well, so in 1994, an anonymous poster on the Money Talk bulletin board, these are great old words, on Prodigy, speaking of old words, right, said that a company on Long Island called Stratton Oakmont was a fraud. Now, it turns out Stratton Oakmont, from Wolf of Wall Street and Leo DiCaprio movie, was a fraud. It was like the worst bucket shop in existence. It wasn't even a Wall Street firm. It was out on Long Island. But Stratton Oakmont sued Prodigy, saying, hey, you're a publisher, and you said false things on your site. And strangely, Prodigy lost. And so in Congress in 1995, they were writing the Communication Decency Act. And they put in Section 230. It's one of the few things I've actually seen Congress do correctly. And they slipped in the following language that said, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider, giving them that liability. You can't sue Facebook. You can't sue Google if you don't like what they are hosting. They're a platform. They also put in the following language, that companies can restrict content that is obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, and otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. Okay?
They can, they're not required.
They can, they're not required. This is what created Facebook. There is no social media or even search business today without that. And so, well, is Section 230 regulation? No, it's not regulation. It's the walls around the sandbox that allowed these companies to create.
Which you applaud then, yeah.
I applaud it. It ends up with what we have. Now, there are community standards, and so they can take down whatever they want. But of course, there is the Michael Jordan rule. You know, the Michael Jordan rule, which is Republicans buy sneakers too. Meaning, you can't just take down things on the right or things on the left. You need that balance. Now, sometimes Facebook gets it right, sometimes they don't. But to say, let's re-regulate or regulate at all these private companies, I think it would be a big mistake.
Which certainly is being said both on the right and the left in the United States right now, and is being said all across Europe and Singapore and India, a lot of places.
Yes. Yeah. So Josh Hawley, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri was mentioned yesterday. He's one that wants to repeal Section 30. Big mistake. But he also wants
And he's a Republican, yeah.
And he's a Republican. He also wants to regulate how social networks are used, including the following. Now, you got to tell me if you think this is right or not. First of all, he says that Zuckerberg and Facebook are forces parasitic on our national life. I don't know, that sounds a little extreme to me. But here's what he wants to do. 1, remove the autoplay feature from YouTube. We heard about that yesterday. End infinite scrolling on Twitter and Facebook feeds. Limit scrolling time to 3-minute sessions.
That's pretty controlling.
Set default limits on the use of platforms to 30 minutes a day.
What, you can't use a platform for more than 30 minutes a day?
This was in the bill that...
That does not sound like American.
I don't like it, but
that does not sound American, I will admit.
This is the slippery slope of regulation, is who's doing the regulating.
But he doesn't want to ban political ads, by the way, just
No.
in case you noticed that as a Republican.
But the more he entrenches himself in Congress, he's only, this is his first term,
Yeah.
he will start wanting to ban political ads. We heard yesterday a bunch, you talked about Jack Dorsey, Twitter banning political ads. Well, what does that do? Well, that locks in incumbents. It takes out a platform for new independent voices to find an audience. If you ban political ads, I think Zuckerberg is doing it the right way. I think, he says, well, there will be no fact-checking on political ads. Well, not by Facebook, but there is fact-checking done elsewhere. And you want more voices to be heard, not less. And I think that's the way forward.
Well, it's good to have a voice saying that on this stage since we've had so many. And I get confused what I think really ought to happen. I think Section 230 was fantastic at the time. It was probably needed, although the Stratton Oakmont history is fascinating and ironic.
Yes.
I'm not so sure that it makes sense now. In fact, I'm pretty sure I don't support it in its current implementation now. I also happen personally not to believe in breakup as a solution. I think that's a silly point. But one of the things that's so intriguing about you, and we can talk about some of the things Tristan said, but you think the seeds of destruction of these platforms is planted anyway. So let's hear that.
Well, I'm a believer in free markets, and I think markets with the price signals involved will solve the problems or the perceived problems that we have today, or that you have with with any industry. And what triggered a lot of that thinking about the seeds of destruction was General Electric got thrown out of the Dow Industrial Averages, right? About a year and change ago. And writing
Wow,
for,
that's amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's
writing
so hard
for,
to believe.
For the Wall Street Journal, which is a Dow Jones company, under the News Corp umbrella now, of course, I wrote a column saying, hey, look, this is how capitalism works, right? Is new players come along and they destroy the old, and GE, it was one of the great companies. It used to be 1% of GDP, and now it's thrown out of the Dow. And I said, and so let's learn the lessons that the leaders today aren't going to be the leaders 20 years from now. Or 40 years from now. They're just not going to be. There'll be new players that come along. And you can look at that over time, and it's proven again and again. And then I threw in a line saying something like, and the seeds of destruction are already planted in the big tech companies today. Well, that week, I got more emails and calls from hedge funds and money managers saying, what are those seeds of destruction? Because, between Facebook and Amazon and Apple, they're all so over-owned. Everyone's nervous as heck.
The collective market cap is in the multi-trillions.
Yes,
yeah.
well, they're right. The top three, well, including Microsoft, are a trillion each. So I said, I better figure out, to throw away. I better figure out. So it's pretty straightforward that, yes, those seeds of destruction are already planted. With Apple, it's I think the most obvious, is iPhones are like radial tires. This was, Bill Gates always worried that whatever he did, his software would become like a radial tire, which is you buy it and it doesn't wear out like older tires used to do. And we see that with the iPhone. iPhone units have peaked. In fact, they're slightly down. So what did Apple do? Well, they raised prices. You don't raise prices in the tech business. You constantly lower prices. Yes, they add new features, but iPad numbers are down. So with Apple, they're trying to add services and the like, and good luck, because they're selling into the same and maybe even shrinking base of users. So that is pretty clear that seed of destruction plan. What about Facebook? Well, Facebook, it's multifold. Number one, their subscriber numbers have peaked. It's like 2-point-something billion. They're not allowed in China. They're not in Russia because FontGate or whatever it's called is the leading thing there. And,
well, they have users in Russia, but not too many. Yeah.
Not too many. And unfortunately, their biggest markets for ad dollars, anyway, in the US and the UK, are already rolling over. They're already starting heading down. So yes, Instagram and WhatsApp, and you can monetize that and all that. But the big moneymaker at Facebook, in terms of the number of subscribers, are rolling over. Second, there's competition. Well, is it Snapchat or something like that? No. There's 100 plus new social networks.
Okay, let's hear some of them.
Well, start with Nextdoor and things like that. But think about Fortnite. Fortnite is a social network, and even better with audio that in real time with a much better visual display.
Which is the de facto home for most teenage men in particular. But it's
correct.
It's the games that everybody plays.
And
in
go through whether it's photo sharing. There's hundreds of, I can't do them off the top of my head, list the whole 100. But
TikTok too, right?
TikTok too.
Which
yes.
Zuckerberg called a threat to democracy. So there you go.
And why shouldn't he? It's a competitor. It's a competitor for eyeballs. But it used to be, it was competing against TV. Now they're competing against other interactive services. So I think the seeds of Facebook's destruction are already planted. Now, this doesn't mean they're going to disappear tomorrow, but over a decade's time, these things are going to bite.
Okay, what about Google?
Okay, Google, it was the hardest because, man, they've got an ironclad business model, and they buy a whole bunch of servers, and their algorithms deliver information to us at the right time. But it's still a centralized company. Yes, they distribute their servers around the globe, but it's still a centralized company. And I'm not a believer in the value. I actually think Bitcoin is worth $100, but the blockchain that
I'm with you on that one, by the way. Go on.
The blockchain that cryptocurrencies provide means that you get people out in the marketplace putting servers in place rather than a centralized company. And at some point, and I don't know when this is, but at some point, the multitude of those servers put in at the edge of the network is going to be multiples of the number of servers that Google even can afford to put in place.
Interesting. And 5G and IoT could, in various ways, compound that complexity in a critical. I don't know how it affects Google exactly, but certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly.
And then Amazon is even simpler. Is the stock market has given Amazon a lot of rope, if you will, to lose money in emerging markets. You know, first of all, make barely any money in retail and lose money in many emerging markets of theirs, yet still command high valuations. Now, one of the things that came out of that was AWS, and what a valuable service that is, and it allows all sorts of startups to come and not have to build out all that infrastructure. But at some point, and maybe it happened 2 weeks ago, the stock market is going to say, you know what, we don't really like companies that lose a lot of money anymore. WeWork, you saw it with Uber and Lyft as the valuations came in. And so at some point, the sort of infinite credit line for Amazon is going to start to come in. And you know, it just means they're going to have to rationalize a lot of businesses that they do. But again, that's one of the seeds of destruction for them. Remember, Microsoft had the seeds of destruction, the fact that they were stuck on the PC. And they went through this long period of reinventing themselves, and what a wonderful job they've done in terms of the cloud. So these things happen. We know that they happen. Leaders go away.
Did you hear Tim O'Reilly say that customers didn't choose Uber, investors chose Uber, and that's sort of the problem that it's played out over time?
Yeah, I think that's a little extreme. I mean, I think Uber has a terrific business model, but part of the goal, you know, remember, this was the SoftBank, listen, just step on the accelerator and push the curves to grow faster, is that they needed to be in as many markets as they could. And remember, they lost billions in China until they sold their business in China to Didi and took equity instead. And it just means that there's still a market share battle going on, certainly between them and Lyft and them and others around the globe. And it required a lot of capital. You could have done it slower, and I think if they did, they'd have a much more sustainable business model. I think with all that capital, they made entries into the autonomous car business, things that you go, really? Why don't you just perfect the ride-sharing business? Uber Eats, which it turns out to be a terrific business, but it's not necessarily the power alley of Uber.
Okay. Well, I self-critique that we were very packed. We are out of time.
Good.
Thank you so much for being here and for giving us a little more amplified view of these issues. I
Thank
really
you. My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Tim.
So next, Adam Burden is going to come on, and Adam is the guy who oversees much of the engineering and innovation work at Accenture. He's based in Singapore. He oversees 35,000 engineers. He's got a great presentation, so I'm going to turn it over to Adam Burden of Accenture.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks. Wow. Hi, everybody. Adam Burden. It's so great to be here. I wanted to actually start by saying I'm a bit of a newbie to Techonomy, and it's been a very interesting couple of days. I have to say the diversity of thought here has been breathtaking, but what's even impressed me more is the civility of discourse. Like, there's a lot of people here that don't necessarily agree, but the fact that we can talk about it and debate it has really been incredible. So thank you for the opportunity to come here and experience this. This has really been pretty incredible for me. I have been with Accenture a long time, for 28 years. I'm our chief software engineer, and I spent a lot of time thinking about our client systems and enterprise systems and what we're doing. And I also think about some of the things, the themes that have been here around reset and restore, and especially around the governance of technology, and are we doing the right things in implementing tech for our clients? And I'm going to spend a few minutes as I go through this actually talking about that, if I can get this to work. There we go. Okay. So what I'd like to actually start with is talking a little bit about Accenture and what we do in terms of governing ourselves. And I'm a bit aligned with what Andy was just saying. I'm not sure that regulation is the answer here. I actually believe that many corporations, with a little bit of government oversight, really should self-regulate themselves. And I do believe that Accenture has actually made a lot of progress in these areas in the last several years. I mean, some of the things that we've been successful at doing are we've announced a commitment to being 100% on renewable energy by 2023. We are ranked #1 on Barron's list of most sustainable companies. We also received a perfect score on Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Scorecard for every year since 2008. So if you want evidence that companies can learn and that their objectives transcend shareholder returns, I do believe that we've done that. And the research that I'm going to share with you today is actually just one of many things that we try to do to actually share the things that we learn, the research that we do with others, so that they can actually benefit from it. And this research is really important because we run into companies all over the world that have really serious challenges, growth challenges. They might have security challenges or other issues. And they're struggling to survive in this digital age. Remarkably, though, that there are others that seem to do quite well, but it's a small percentage of them. And by the way, it's not just the companies that were born in the digital era. It's others. And the question that we had for ourselves was, what are they doing different? What can we do to take the lemons that are out there and kind of turn them into lemonade? And that's what I'd like to spend a few minutes talking to you about. So we believe that we have somewhat cracked the code on this. And last night I had a great conversation with Mark of Pattern Computing, and I was talking to him about hypothesis testing and other things. He said, yeah, Adam, you've got it wrong. You don't want to test hypothesis anymore. Let the machine tell you what the hypothesis should be. I'm not sure that that's the angle that we necessarily take in most statistical analysis, but that diversity of thought, as I said, it's inspired me maybe to think differently. But we had an idea. We had some ideas anyway of what we thought was causing some of this problem. And because this idea we thought could actually benefit really any company, any organization, a nonprofit, a government, et cetera, we thought it was important enough to do a very broad set of research and try and understand exactly why this was happening. And paradoxically, one thing that really surprised us about this too is that it didn't seem to equate to the amount of money that companies invested in technology. There are plenty of companies out there that pour enormous resources into innovation attempts and technology, but they don't actually see the kind of outcomes on there. And there are others that are relatively modest, more frugal innovators, if you will, and they achieve great returns out of it. What's causing that chasm? So we did this research, and what we found is that there are strong correlations out there to pay attention to. And what I'd like to start with is actually talking about the research that we did, because this was the largest enterprise study that Accenture's ever conducted. We gathered 1.6 million pieces of data, about 8,300 plus companies out there in 20 industries in 20 countries around the world. And we said, what separates these guys? What's different about them? And we tested our hypothesis about what makes a leader versus a laggard. And some of them didn't work, and others did. And it really helped us distinguish them. But really, what we wanted to ask ourselves question is, why are we calling them leaders versus laggards? Is there a real difference between the two about how they use tech adoption? And the answer to that is yes. There's actually a huge difference between them. The companies that are leveraging technology in these different ways, that they're embracing and adopting it differently, they see huge differences in their business performance. In fact, those leaders I was talking about, we'll call it the top 10% of that 8,300 companies. On average, they actually see twice the revenue growth of others. And this played out in every geography that we looked at, in every industry. You could have two industries that were in the same economic conditions, or two companies in the same industry, same economic conditions, same geography, peers in that, and very, very different outcomes in terms of business performance. And a lot of it seems to be correlated to how they're embracing and adopting technology. So that's some of the secret, or at least some of the data that we had out there. What did we find as we really started to look inside of that, and why were they able to actually grow faster? Well, I think that it underscores the importance of this when you start talking about money, because especially for corporations, this is hugely important. And what we found is that the revenue growth of these companies was hugely different. This actually is just illustrating a hypothetical $10 billion company. And what we did is we estimated between about 2015 and now how much revenue growth they've actually foregone. It's about $3 billion or so. And if they continue on that same trajectory, the leaders versus the laggards, if you will, a leader is going to see $20 billion in incremental growth that a laggard will actually forego. So pretty important that companies, organizations, and businesses around the world perhaps learn something from this and say, how can we embrace and adopt technology a little bit differently to actually make our performance better, to be able to serve our citizens better, to be able to actually provide better returns to shareholders, and maybe be a better corporate citizen as well, because we can actually invest some of that back into our corporate citizenship programs. So these are the things that we really came into and said, these are the barriers that people have and found that really make a difference. And the first one I'll talk about is around mastering technology adoption. And this is as much about culture as it is about the technologies themselves. And the technologies themselves are actually a bit of a false positive, because if you look at something like, I don't know, cloud, for example, cloud's pervasive across these 8,300 companies. They're all using cloud to some extent, but it's the way that they're actually using it which makes a difference. So the companies that are using the more sophisticated versions of cloud, the more sophisticated capabilities of serverless technologies or speech to text, as opposed to using cloud as a cheaper data center, that is what distinguishes the leaders from the laggards here. So different attitudes, different types of tech adoption, and you'll see a willingness to fail, a willingness to experiment, a different type of culture and mindset inside that. And again here, what was really striking in this area was it's not necessarily just the digital natives. The digital natives have problems just like this. There's a company here in the Valley that Accenture is actually helping, a known digital native, and we're actually helping them rewrite their payment system because it doesn't scale, right? You would think that they're able to do that type of thing in the tech adoption they're doing, but it doesn't. So basically the point is that they're not immune to it just because they happen to be a digital native. The second one is around architectural flexibility. And this is the area that I get most excited about as our software engineer, is that I think about how do you build systems that are really interoperable and differently constructed than before. And when we think about some of the challenges that we have right now in front of us about trust, about data inside of systems, about being able to validate stuff, if you construct systems using some of the lessons of what we call future systems in there, and you're thinking about things like boundaryless systems or more adaptable systems, that you can actually build them to actually evolve over time as opposed to need to be replaced or upgraded. And this is a very different set of thinking. And as a systems integrator, it's actually a little counterintuitive to our business if you think about it. I love the opportunity to go and screw in a new system for a client. That makes us a lot of money to do that. But it's actually the wrong kind of thinking for today, because you can't afford to take the kind of outage necessary to install a new SAP system just to fix something. You need something that's much more evolutionary in nature. So an architectural flexibility really can give you that. And the final one that we feel very passionate about is really rethinking about how you create seamless human experiences. And that, of course, has to do with trust. Do the humans trust the information that they're seeing? Is the data actually trusted? If it's corporate data, can I make good decisions off of it? It also has to do with how you're taking advantage of different types of user interfaces. So yesterday, Mark from Adobe was talking about voice, and I feel very strongly about this. And I'll say that we believe at Accenture that AI is actually the new UI. You're going to find that artificial intelligence very rapidly is going to change the way that we interact and interface with different types of technology around us. And screens, is it the end of screens? Probably not, because screens are a great and effective way to get information, but it's going to be a very different way of interacting in the future. The companies who have already started to embrace this type of thing, they're building these future systems, they're experimenting with newer technologies, they're the ones that are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. So when we think about enterprise systems that are out there, we believe that it's time for a bit of a hard reset out there. Even if it's something that doesn't necessarily align with what Accenture's business model has been for a long time about doing big systems integration projects, we think that for the pace of technology change that's out there, for the types of problems that we've got with governance and technology adoption, we really have to think about with a hard reset that we have to do on enterprise systems to change the way that they perform for our clients and the outcomes that they actually deliver. And when we categorize this, what does a future system actually look like? We think there's three. We think there's three things that people need to look at. The first, we believe that they need to be boundaryless. This is an important one because the distinctions between infrastructure and code and databases and applications, those things that used to be nicely layered in a good monolithic system, they're gone. They don't exist anymore. And if the monolith is controlling your enterprise, it's actually holding you back and handicapping what your future capabilities are. So we believe very strongly in this concept of boundaryless. For example, taking things that are events or data in the enterprise and actually publishing them out. Instead of making them messages between systems, sharing them so that anybody can subscribe to those things. Creating data lakes so you can do artificial intelligence capabilities on it. Those are really important capabilities, and boundaryless systems embrace exactly that. The second one is around being adaptable. And yesterday, Colin from GE was talking about how AI needs to be humble. And that really resonated with me because that is the epicenter of what an adaptable system is supposed to do. It should constantly be learning from the user environment and the feedback loop that it's actually getting and changing itself, changing its behavior. And it can be as simple as making the user interface more pleasing to someone, making them more efficient in what they do, or it could be something as sophisticated as keeping your airplane engines running a little bit longer and people safe up in the sky. Adaptable systems do exactly that. And the future leaders, or the leaders that are out there, they are definitely building their future systems in that way. And then finally, I'll just touch on the last characteristic here for a second of radically human. This is really thinking about the types of ways that we've built systems in the past. We can't continue that. And everybody in here is actually a victim of this, and I see several of you of being a victim of it right now. You're using a keyboard that was laid out in the 1800s to actually slow people down from typing too fast, right? Does that make sense anymore? It doesn't make sense. We need to be thinking about building systems around people rather than taking people and making them work around systems. And radically human is just about that sort of reset, that hard reset, and rethinking about how we're building them. And you will find that the leaders of tomorrow, they are doing exactly that. They're thinking about how do they make AI the new UI. So that's it. That's what I wanted to share with you about future systems. I wanted to offer that there is some optimism. There are companies and outfits out there that are looking at what do we need to do to better govern ourselves? What type of information can we share to make the world a better place and to help people build future systems and make them operate a little bit better? And I probably have about maybe a minute for a question if someone has one. Does anyone have a question? Great.
I'm wondering if you can name some companies that have nailed all three of those conditions.
Yeah, so first of all, our survey was was blind because we wanted people to answer very honestly when they were giving some of this. But there are definitely some outfits out there that we think have done this. And they're not necessarily the ones that you would think of and say, hey, these are born in the cloud type companies. Of course they've got it right. But companies that even reinvested themselves, if you look at like Microsoft has done an incredible job of taking their enterprise IT systems, so the systems that run their back office, and transforming them to actually run so much better by embracing some of these systems of boundaryless, or some of these principles of boundaryless, adaptable, and radically human. And there's lots of others around the world that we admire. Cathay Pacific is another one that we think very highly of. They really have rethought how do they embrace technology, how do they embrace disruptive technology for innovation in their enterprise. As I go around the world, I come up with many examples of this. But honestly, it's only a fraction of the total of that 8,300 that we look at. Anything else? So I'll just ask one question I always get whenever I give this presentation, which is around talent, and I'll close on that. So talent, the talent equation, we get so many questions about, well, what skills do I need to be more successful as an enterprise in the future? And the question is the wrong question to be asking. The question that you should be asking, and the question and what we see, the principles that these organizations, these high performers, the ones that are growing their revenue growth rate higher or 2x what the others are, what they're asking about their future talent is, what is their appetite and their hunger to learn? And it really transforms kind of taking the legacy workforce that you have and how do you reskill them to be more successful by thinking about how do we give new opportunities and create enthusiasm and excitement for learning differently. And that might be experiential learning like Amazon Deep Bracer, if anybody's run into that type of thing before. It can really inspire a workforce and help them actually learn things differently and create this culture of continuous learning, because we find that that element of this that will make or break anyone. You can invest and be doing all these other things correctly, but having the talent behind it is super important as well. So that's it. Thank you guys so much. Please do pick up a copy of our Future Systems report. There's a ton of them that's around, or you can go to the Accenture website and grab it as well. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Adam. Jane Long, we're going to hear from now. Jane had a long career as a scientist, geologist, and environmentalist at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, a number of other great places. Since she retired, she has pretty much devoted herself as an environmentalist to the crisis of climate, and she is now deeply involved with both national and efforts in California around rethinking our energy systems and how we need to respond to this urgent crisis, and she's done some very original research and thinking, so I'd love to hear her tell us about it now. So Jane.
Thanks. I'm not going to talk to you today about energy, but I am going to talk to you about the concept of intentional modification of the climate. And this is only one of the most complicated and difficult problems that humanity has ever faced, and so we're going to do it in 10 minutes. What I'd like to say is I'd like to tell you about why we're going to be looking at it, what it actually is, what the technologies are, how they might be used, and what some of the issues are in trying to get research started. So how many of you have ever heard of persistence of CO2 or the bathtub effect of climate? Have any of you heard of this? This is probably the single most important fact about climate science that people generally don't understand. When you put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it stays there, and it stays there for thousands of years. So this means that every time you drive your car, you are putting something like 33 tons of carbon dioxide. Every time you use up a gas tank, 33 tons or so of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it's going to stay there for your children and your grandchildren and their children. So what that means is we have a carbon budget. There's only so much carbon that we can put in the atmosphere before we reach these putative limits on temperature increase. And right now, we are only years, maybe a decade, maybe two, away from surpassing 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius. So that means we're headed for a climate crisis no matter what we do. We have bought a climate crisis. We do need to stop emitting as fast as we can to avoid this. But right now, this is what emissions look like worldwide. What you see here is some slight decline in the United States, mostly due to fracking. Fracking has brought gas into the electricity generation market, replacing coal, which has caused a significant decline in US emissions. But worldwide, they're going up, which you see on the left-hand graph. And if you can look on the right, it's largely due to what's happening in China. So no matter what we do, we have a worldwide problem in emission increase. We're not going to do that. So what do we have to do to stay below? This is IPCC, or these are UN results done by many, many scientists who look at trying to understand how we could reach these limits. And what you see in the red curve is what would happen if we continue as business as usual, and we have to get to the blue curve of emissions per year to stay below 2 degrees. And what you see is that the conventional mitigation methods that are under consideration will take us part of the way there in the gray zone, but the blue zone are emissions that are going to be very hard to get rid of. And all the model results throughout the world showing how we can stay below these limits now show intentional modification of the climate in some way. They use the models generally use a withdrawal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but there are other technologies that could also bring us there. We will have to consider, my view is we will have to consider climate engineering to stay below these limits. There are two kinds of technologies that are under consideration now. One is called negative emission technologies. And these technologies actually withdraw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They're like going back in time. So we go back, we bring our climate back to a previous state. The difficulty with all of these technologies, direct air capture, taking CO2 out of the air and then putting it underground, growing crops, using those crops to produce energy, capturing the CO2 from the flue and putting that underground, and growing crops and artificial fertilization in the ocean, all of these are very, very slow and very expensive. For example, if you burn 100 gallons of gasoline in your cars, you're going to produce about a ton of CO2 in the atmosphere. To get that ton of CO2 out of the atmosphere, and that will produce about 13 gigajoules of energy. Sorry, not gigajoules. Sorry, I have to, when I'm up here, it's hard for me to do. Petajoules. No, that's not right. Gigajoules, yeah. It is gigajoules of energy to burn that 100 gallons of gasoline. If you now want to capture that and take it out of the atmosphere, you're going to have to use 5 to 10 gigajoules of energy. So it's a very difficult thing to make that equation work financially, not to mention from the engineering perspective. We do need to do this. We will need to do that. We need to do more research on it. The other way is to cool the planet by reflecting some of the sunlight that comes into the Earth. And that stratospheric aerosol concept is to put usually sulfur particles into the stratosphere and allow those particles to reflect sunlight back into the atmosphere, thus cooling the Earth. And we know this works because volcanic eruptions often produce sulfur particles that go into the stratosphere. This is the Pinatubo eruption in 1991, which cooled the planet by about 1 degree for a number of years. So we know that we can do this, and we also have done some feasibility studies to show that we could actually get that amount of particles into the air. So we also know that these methods, by calculation, we can see that, for example, on the upper left, you see what would happen to the Earth, how it would get warmer if we quadrupled the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And on the right, you see what you could do to return the Earth to a temperature realm that was more like what it is today by using aerosols in the stratosphere. And we also know that precipitation could be returned to something closer to today. But these are very problematic technologies for a number of reasons, because we don't know exactly how they're going to behave. Another idea is to brighten clouds, and we know that clouds get brightened also with aerosols because we can see the tracks of ships that go across the ocean because the exhaust produces aerosols and causes those clouds to brighten. So we know we have some technologies that might work. So what is the role for this? Business as usual, the climate impacts are going up and up. We need to cut emissions. That's the first and most important strategy for dealing with climate change. But we probably are going to have to remove some of this carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. There's a bunch of technologies that might do this. As I said, they're very slow and expensive. So we're looking at a period of time when temperatures might exceed what we're really able to withstand. And here's where solar geoengineering might come in, to cut off the peak. If we don't do mitigation and we don't remove the CO2 from the atmosphere, we can't use these technologies because the impacts of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will increase and increase and increase. And so you'll have to put more and more aerosols into the stratosphere, in which case you will have you will go farther and farther from known climate states and higher risk. But if we are using these together in a concerted strategy, it might be possible to manage this crisis. So what are the things we have to think about? We need to do the research. We need to inform future decisions. People say if we do this research, it'll make these technology applications inevitable. But my concern is that we are going to do them anyway, and we need to know more rather than less. We need to learn how to be strategic about climate. We're not going to solve this problem by incremental and emergent technologies. We have to be strategic on a large scale. And one of the things about geoengineering is that it's inherently strategic. So when we engage in this kind of research, we can begin to learn to be strategic. People are already considering doing these kinds of interventions. They're considering doing them on a regional scale. The Australians are considering saving the barrier reef with cloud brightening. Indonesians have used technologies to rain out storms so they don't flood. People are thinking about technologies to save the Arctic, to keep the Arctic from melting. These are already under consideration. They need to be informed by better research. We need to start low-risk research now. We don't need to perturb the climate of the Earth to understand a lot more. We can do a lot of modeling work, and there's an awful lot of physical and chemical processes in the atmosphere that we don't understand very well that we have to do research on. And those are low risk. But when we start these, this is the perfect opportunity to also start to learn to govern this technology. We need to start research governance and grow research governance into governance of the technology now. And this means changing the way we do the way we do research. This is not curiosity-driven research anymore. This needs to be mission-driven research, systematic research, and it needs to be, in the words of our LinkedIn friend yesterday, we need to have clarity. This community uses the word transparency, and I have always been a little bit skeptical of transparency because to most scientists that means putting all their data on the web, which is a meaningless thing for society. So we need to learn how to clarify what this research means to the public as a research community. So if you have questions, I'm happy to take them offline, and I hope you get interested in this topic. Thank you. You're welcome.
Really good. Thanks so much.
Good.
All right. Well, I would just go straight into our next session. Thank you, Jane, because that geoengineering topic, one of the things she didn't mention is how inexpensive it is to do, which is one of the things that makes it all the more urgent that research be done because, as she mentioned, Indonesia, they already tried it. Rich people could do it independently as individuals, even in some cases, if they chose to. So Roy Smythe, please join me on stage. Roy is a doctor. Hi, Roy, please join. Roy is a doctor, and he's currently the CEO of a company called SomaLogic, based in Boulder, which has been around for a long time, and he's going to tell us what they're doing. It's in the field of proteomics, which is a very important area that in health that most people don't really know that much about. Prior to that, he was the chief medical officer for Philips North America, which is how we first met. But Roy, just go right in and tell us what is SomaLogic and what is proteomics?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me back, David. I've really enjoyed the meeting and the conversations. Proteomics is the measure of proteins in living organisms. In the case of SomaLogic, we measure proteins in the human body. And by virtue of the ability to measure several-fold more proteins in the human body than any other enterprise in a commercial context, we were able to tell you things about your current health and future health that previously wasn't possible.
That's pretty cool. And so, I mean, so is it a nascent field? Is it a field that is going to be affecting our health now? I mean, we're measuring, how many proteins do we have, by the way, roughly?
So we've got 20,000 basic protein structures. I think that the important thing to know is that, genes exist for one reason. They exist in the body to make proteins. And so proteins are the structural and functional molecules of life. My 9-year-old asked me, hey, Dad, when I took this job about a year ago, he goes, Dad, what are proteins? And I said, well, everything you're looking at when you're looking at Dad basically is proteins. And he's like, oh, okay. He had no idea what that meant. But so 20,000 basic protein structures in the body. And the problem has been that All 20,000 have different shapes, they have different concentrations, they have different locations in the body, different half-lives. And so the ability to measure enough of them at any one time to tell you something, from a signaling standpoint has been an incredible challenge.
But we've really only recently learned to really measure proteins in the body, right? But the science there, which you're so deeply involved in, is advancing rapidly. The key, though, is that as our health changes, as our behavior changes, the protein makeup of our bodies change along with those things, right?
That's right.
So that if you take blood after you've run a marathon, or if you have a flu, or if you even probably just tripped and fell, something would be different in your blood that could be measured if we knew how to measure it. Is that a fair statement?
That's right, and that's a crucial difference between what proteomics is going to be able to tell you versus what genomics can tell you. So genomics, has sort of captured the imagination and the funding of the world in this context of clinical diagnostics. I've got a couple of slides. Should I show these just to sort of drive these points home?
But the point about genomics is your genome never changes.
Yeah,
that's basically, okay, we can figure out what your genes are. They were that way when you were conceived, more or less, shortly thereafter.
Exactly.
And they're that way until you die. And sometimes that'll help us diagnose things or help us predict things, but it doesn't change. That's the key thing.
That's exactly it. As we say, they're not contextual.
Right, okay. So what are you showing us here?
And so this, just to drive that point home, so genes, you have one structure, one location. I mean, obviously it's in every cell of your body that have DNA. Some cells don't, but it's always in the same place. It always has the same half-life or how long it lasts, and it changes 0 times in your life. So this is why when you do genotyping, you don't swab your cheek repeatedly because you're going to get the same result. Proteins, on the other hand, 20,000 different structures, millions of locations in your body, 20,000 half-lives, and this is the key. During the course of your life, your proteome turns over 40,000 times.
I mean, completely turns over?
Yes.
Wow.
And so
it means it's constantly evolving.
And it's contextual, so it can tell you things about your current health state and your future health states based on context and not on some mutated gene that may or may not play out over time depending on age and environmental exposures, what drugs you're taking, et cetera.
So do you want to show another slide now, or shall I ask you a question? I wanted to ask you about SomaLogic.
Sure.
You came in as the CEO roughly a year ago, a little more than a year ago, right?
That's right.
And the company, however, has been around for, what, 20 years?
20 years.
Yeah, so talk about that. And why did it take 20 years? And what are you doing?
Well, I think we're a metaphor for the concept that there is no such thing as an overnight success. It's taken 20 years to be able to measure this many proteins in the body. To develop a technology, so we have a proprietary way of doing this, but to also develop an assay in which the proteins can be measured. And then actually the most important thing, which is sort of, I think, referable to this conference, is the computing power to take what we basically do, and we discern patterns of protein expression at any one moment in time. The computing power, the machine learning that's necessary to look at those protein expression patterns and then correlate them with some outcome has only been available now.
So in other words, you've been learning stuff for 20 years, but until we had enough computing power, given the complexity of what you were trying to measure, we really couldn't put it to use.
That's right. So it's been a combination of developing the technology, the platform to measure this many proteins at one time, which again, we're so far the only company that's been able to do that, and then having the computing capabilities catch up with the needs of discernment.
So we're now at a state where we can measure some proteins, right? I mean, how many do you typically find you're able to measure in one go, in one person?
So we measure 5,000 at a time. We'll move that up to 7,500 at a time. And to put that in context, our closest competitor can measure about 1,000.
And okay, you're using it sort of in two fundamental ways. So talk about those two ways. What is it allowing us to do right now?
So the two ways we use it, one is that pharma companies are using the platform, and we've been selling the platform to them for the last 2 or 3 years in clinical trials.
For drug development.
Yeah, so you can imagine if you're in the middle of a drug trial and 97% of drugs have proteins as their targets. We're giving the drug company 5,000 pieces of data every time they put a drug in a patient's body. So is the drug hitting my target of interest? Is it hitting other targets that could be, I could develop a drug from in the future? Is it hitting targets that I don't want it to hit? And then another interesting thing for pharma, and this is a little bit of a departure that I'll ask you to go on with me for a second here. I'll talk in a minute about the tests that we're developing from this platform, the second part of our business. But as we're developing diagnostic tests from this database of protein information from humans and clinical information, the models that predict outcomes in humans, there are groups of proteins from tens to hundreds of the 5,000 each time that predict outcomes. When you look at the protein, so for example, we have a test that predicts your risk of a heart attack or stroke in the next 4 years. It has about 26 proteins that reproducibly predict that. 75% of those proteins have no known relationship to the heart. And so, again, it's a pattern recognition.
And yet we know there's a correlation.
Well, we know there's a correlation because it's consistently there. And of course, pharma is keenly interested in understanding that network biology because embedded in that information in the future will be other important drug targets.
So it's a way of continuing to expand our knowledge, which is, even as we do this, proven to be shockingly small about how we actually work, right? But as we seek to develop new drugs, this should accelerate that process.
Yeah, and it even goes beyond that. So there's a reason why a lot of biologic drugs haven't panned out to be as effective as we had hoped. Some of the first generation biologic drugs were directed at mutated genes. So here's a gene that's mutated in an illness. This must be the gene of importance, and that gene creates a protein, and they designed a drug to inhibit that protein or target that protein. The problem is that there's something called a pleiotropic effect, where the protein that gene makes then affects maybe 100 other proteins, and it's one of those 100 other proteins that is the actual target. If you can only measure 1,000 of the 20,000 proteins in the body, the likelihood of finding that protein that it's affecting is incredibly low, but with our platform, pharma is actually being able to discern that.
And you just did a huge deal with Novartis, for example, and you have other such deals in the works.
That's right.
Where they basically will make using SomaLogic's testing a key part of their drug development process.
That's right.
So you go ahead, sorry.
Well, but you asked me about the two ways in which we're using our platform. So we think that's pretty exciting, and we think that'll be impactful, but we also think it sort of pales in comparison to the other thing that we're doing.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that is creating these diagnostic tests. I'll just show a couple of...
In clinical use.
So
basically,
for clinical use.
Using it on us, when we go to the doctor, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so again, the concept here is that at any one moment in your body, some of your cells are excreting proteins actively, and then other cells are dying and releasing proteins into your bloodstream. So there are thousands and thousands and thousands of proteins in your blood at any one moment. We take blood samples. We've done this 300,000 times from human samples. And then we use bioinformatics to create models that predict, again, current health and future health based on that. And so here's the pipeline of tests we have in development. The ones on the left, several of these have already been released in sort of a limited release locally in Colorado, where we're looking at logistics, sample movement, reports and so forth. But I'll point a couple of things out. So I mentioned earlier that one of these primary cardiovascular risks, so half the tests are medical and half of them are health and wellness. And again, this is a departure from genomics. Genomics can't tell you anything about your current body's physiology, but we can because that's what proteins signal. So on the medical side, one of the tests we just released is primary cardiovascular risk. So what is my risk of a heart attack or stroke in the next 4 years? That might be important to know. And on health and wellness, for example, we've got a test there for aerobic fitness. And so currently, if you want to know what your VO2 max is, you have to get on a treadmill with a mask on and exercise yourself to exhaustion. We can do that just from 60 microliters of blood. And you can see all the other things that are in the pipeline for the next few years to develop from this. And of course, each time we do this, we can do this, we can run all of these tests, depending on what's required or needed or desired, from one blood sample, because these are just algorithms that are run on the proteins the protein patterns that are expressed each time we evaluate.
And of course, you mentioned you're only doing it in Colorado because the logistics are challenging. I mean, how quickly could this be expanded to be a national and then global opportunity for health improvement? And how expensive would it be? How much would it raise the cost of healthcare to be applying this?
Well, we're hoping that it can be done really quickly.
But there's a possibility, at least, obviously.
Well, but there's some hurdles, right? So we've got some regulatory things to deal with. It's been an R&D. We've been an R&D company for 19 years, and so we have to build out a commercial infrastructure. And of course, there will be money involved to create, to do those things. As far as the impact on healthcare delivery, this could dramatically lower healthcare delivery costs. I mean,
how so?
Exponentially.
Really?
Absolutely. So one way to think about it would be, the way to think about these tests is they sort of fall into one of four categories: either more convenient, less invasive, less expensive, or in some cases they don't exist, they've never existed before. So for example, we have a test in development that will tell you if you have fatty liver without having to put a needle into your liver, which is currently the state of the art. And so we'll be able to supplant in some cases expensive diagnostic modalities simply from a blood test. And so that lowers the cost immediately. We'll be able to supplant the need for some physician visits. We'll be able to supplant, for example, in the third world, I've got this sort of vision in 7 years that a UN truck drives into a sub-Saharan African village where there's absolutely no healthcare delivery, lines up 200 people, draws a tube of blood, comes back to the central facility, runs 100 tests on the population, and comes back and delivers care. The other alternative would be to put a CT scan or an ultrasound and 15 specialists on that truck, which is not economically feasible. And then, of course, if you think about third-party payers and national health services, probably a better example, we have a test in development that will tell you in your population of type 2 diabetics who's at greatest risk for secondary complication over the next few years. And the ability to sort of bear down on that subpopulation where all the costs are going to be rendered over the next several years, and to, rather than just saying, we'll wait and see who has a secondary complication and treat it, could have a tremendous impact on healthcare costs.
Well, one of the interesting things about this is it has tremendous echoes of what Theranos was trying to do, except that you've taken 20 years to get to a thing that's really expensive but might actually work. But the cool thing that he didn't say is that only in the last 2 months has this actually gone commercial.
That's right.
So, but it's still only being used in private medical practices that don't take insurance, because it is a little on the pricey side, but it is definitely a super, super promising advancement in healthcare, which is why we wanted to have you up here talking about it. And interestingly, we have somebody right after this talking about colon cancer, and I'm sure it could play a big role in reducing the cost of diagnosis there too, because we all know that's an inconvenient diagnosis. So a tool to even ensure you're healthy. So thank you so much, Roy.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, to continue with what I said we were going to do, Brooks Bell, a longtime techonomist, she's probably been to almost as many techonomies as anybody, she's only missed 1 or 2, is going to come on and tell us about her own personal journey and what she's concluded about colon cancer as a result. So, Brooks.
What Roy is doing is so amazing, and I really hope he's successful because it will hopefully render everything I'm about to talk about totally irrelevant. So my name is Brooks. I've been coming to Techonomy for many years, and I run a test and learn operation, but I'm not going to talk about that at all today. I'm going to talk about a story that is deeply personal and a little gross, but I think you need to hear it. So this week, last year, I was sitting in this seat, and my life changed forever. I wish it was the excellent advice you can see John Chambers giving me last year. But no. One morning when I was here, I went to the bathroom, and I looked down, and I saw blood in my stool for the first time. And I was absolutely horrified. And so I called a doctor when I was here, and she said, don't worry about it. It's just hemorrhoids. Everyone gets them. I was like, thank God. So I came back to Raleigh, where I live and moved on with my life, but the blood didn't go away. So 3 weeks later, I called another doctor, got examined. She said it's still hemorrhoids. So I went on, but it went another 3 weeks and had not gone away. So this time I called a gastroenterologist. I wasn't referred. I wanted to get a third opinion. It was a totally different experience in front of this gastroenterologist because they were very alarmed. They said that I was not too young for colon cancer, and they said the next step is to get a colonoscopy. So when I woke up from my colonoscopy, I saw the doctor approaching, and her face was troubled, and I knew it wasn't good news. She said that she had found a tumor, and it was almost certainly cancerous, and that was what was causing the bleeding. I was 38 years old. I went home with my husband to process some of the most shocking news of my life, and shortly thereafter, I was officially diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. And I'm here to talk about my story and all the shocking data that I've learned over the last 11 months and why it matters and what we can do about it. First of all, colon cancer has risen 50% in people under the age of 50 in the last 30 years. On top of that, what's even more alarming is that it is predicted to go up another 90% in people under the age of 35 in the next decade. So this is just getting started. By 2030, up to 25% of new colon cancer cases are going to be young people. It's actually becoming not an old man's disease, it's going to be a young person's disease. And this is totally ridiculous. Colon cancer is also not a rare, obscure cancer. It's actually the third most common and the number 2 most deadly cancer in the US. More people die of colon cancer than breast or prostate cancer, and we almost never hear about it. 1 in 23 people get colon cancer in their lifetime, which means that 8 more people in this room, in addition to me, will get it at some point, and maybe sooner than you think. So what is going on here? Well, this is where Techonomy comes in. There's been many techonomic changes in our environment over the last 30 years. First of all, there's been a lot of changes in our food, in our chemicals, health industries, and there may even be shifts in the way we work that may play a role. Scientists are looking at antibiotics as well as low fiber and more toxins in our diets and in our shampoos and things that we're surrounded with now. They're even looking at something called the gut-brain microbiome axis, which has scientifically shown how stress hormones are constantly interacting with our gut. And all of these trends negatively affect our microbiome. Let me go back. Of which 95% is located in our colon. And so in a nutshell, low fiber processed foods and high stress inflame it. And then antibiotics completely blast it away. And scientists think that this is allowing new bacteria to come in and, on one hand, attack our colon walls while also disabling our immune system from protecting us. And it's leaving us more vulnerable to tumor growth than ever. New York Times last year published an article kind of confirming this theory, where they have found 2 bacterial strains that work together to do just this. And actually this past week, I saw my functional doctor, and we found that I actually have one of those bacterial strains in abundance in my colon. So who knows, it may or may not have affected it, but it's amazing to see these trends start to come together. So here's some really good news. You can almost completely eliminate your risk of colorectal cancer. It's special because you don't need to wait for a lump like you have to do with breast cancer. But with breast cancer and prostate cancer, the best you can do is hope you catch it early. But with colon cancer, you can avoid it completely. That's what's so great and so special about this whole thing. And what is that? I think you see this coming. It's a colonoscopy. So how colonoscopy works is that, or how colon cancer works, is that it always starts as a polyp in your colon. And a polyp is a cute little skin tag that has no symptoms. It does nothing for a whole decade except grow. But you have a whole decade. And a colonoscopy is how you find your polyps. What's so great about it is that when they're in there looking for polyps, they snip them out as they go. And so by the time you wake up, you have been diagnosed and cured of all your risks. So polyps are also very common. Doctors know that 1 in 4 men and 1 in 6 women have a precancerous polyp by their 50th birthday. Just like Will Smith did. He just vlogged his colonoscopy last week, and he also found a precancerous polyp. So that's why colonoscopies are so important in our prevention strategy. And so how do you get one? So I know you all want one now. So if you're over 50, hopefully you already had one. If you haven't, hopefully it's very easy. Just go sign up for one right now. It'll be covered by your insurance no matter what. If you're 45, it may be covered, but it's a little bit more dicey. American Cancer Society just lowered their guideline to 45, which is probably one of the most important developments in the colorectal cancer prevention world. But very little insurance covers it yet because it won't be required until the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force also update their guidelines, which may not happen until a minimum of 2022. One thing I do want to mention here is because American Cancer Society recommends this, for all the employers in this room, you have a huge opportunity to go talk with your HR department and find out if you align with ACS or the U.S. Preventative Services, if your insurance does, and try to get your company to align with ACS. I think it'd be great for your employees. If you're under the age of 45, you're not going to be covered, and unless you're high risk. And what high risk means is that you have family history, which means someone in your family had colon cancer, but it also means that someone in your family had a large polyp. So talk with your parents or your siblings or whatever and find out if they found a large polyp, and that should make you qualified. The second is if you're experiencing changes in your bowel habits, which is mainly blood in your stool. And so if you ever have another digestive health crisis, just don't waste it. Go get a colonoscopy. So I find insurance really frustrating. When I first was diagnosed, my first thought is like, oh my God, I'm going to get everyone in my company to get a colonoscopy. And then my HR guy said that's not possible. And I've learned it's going to be a reality for a while. There's a lot of regulations and things that would need to change before insurance is required. And it's going to be, so it'll be a long and expensive fight to change this because we need a lot of data to show that it's worth it. But we have to start somewhere because there's going to be a lot of young people that get this and die in the next decade. So I'm starting a movement, and the solution is something called Check Out My Ass. So the mission is to create consumer demand for colonoscopies. The goal is to prevent 20,000 cancer diagnoses by inspiring 1 million colonoscopies over the next decade. So one of many, is that colonoscopy is associated with one of the most disgusting substances out there. And if we could just change that to something a little less gross, it'll be the first domino in a very complex problem to solve. So do you guys know about Movember? For prostate and testicular cancer? Well, they were able to shift the conversation from balls to mustaches. So in our case, if we're able to simply shift it from shit to asses, it would be a huge step in the right direction. And so we're going to make denim the new image of colorectal cancer prevention. And I have a really important meeting with a large denim brand actually tomorrow to pitch them on this idea. So I want to wrap up and give you a quick update on how I'm feeling. So as I was diagnosed as stage 3, I was fortunately stage 3A, which has the best odds for all the advanced cancer options. A month after my diagnosis, I had 10 inches of my colon removed through my belly button. My odds are great. I have an 87% chance of disease-free survival. And my first CAT scan is in January. And all that 13% risk is front-loaded to that. But I feel really great. So I'm glad that it's not something I have to be paranoid for that long. I'll be good after a couple of years if it doesn't come back. I went on and did 3 months of pretty intense chemotherapy, and the side effects really sucked. But the best side effect is that my dog didn't leave my lap for the entire time, and so we got quite close. And I also got to keep my hair. So I finished in June, and I'm feeling great. That is a photo of me taking my last chemo pill in June. And since then, I've made tons of positive changes, radical changes in my lifestyle and how I eat. I'm learning to meditate, I'm focusing on my sleep, I'm exercising a lot more. I even cut my stress way back. I actually stepped down as a CEO of my company and put a new leadership in place, and it's going really well. All of this is to strengthen my microbiome and, of course, to reduce my odds of recurrence. And I even signed up for my first triathlon in May, and so I'm starting to train for that. So thank you for letting me share my story, and if I've inspired you to get a colonoscopy, let me know so that I can notch up a few towards my goal. And of course, if you're an employer, there's a lot of opportunity for us to start focusing on helping our own employees prevent colon cancer and doing our part to make a colonoscopy more accessible to our average risk employees. Thank you so much. I think I have time for maybe one question.
Please welcome to the stage. Michelle Stanford, with Chief Marketing Officer at F2O Group, Erin Stroud.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So, the title of this session is How Innovation Will Change Healthcare. The original thesis behind this was more around pragmatic innovation in healthcare, and you're going to hear from 2 experts who work for 2 companies that are doing a lot of really pragmatic but helpful, game-changing things at their companies. I would like to do like a quick introduction of companies, and Julia, since you're sitting off to the right, and we should say Dr. Julia Hoffman, right, since you are a licensed clinical psychologist, which I think will help play into the discussion today. Tell us a little bit about Livongo and what Livongo does and what your role is as the head of behavioral health.
Sure. So Livongo is a chronic conditions company. We serve the whole person and empower people with chronic conditions to live better and healthier lives. So that includes diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, just a whole suite of conditions, and now including behavioral health, which I lead. So I'm VP of Behavioral Health Strategy. Worked with Livongo for quite some time to establish what their behavioral health strategy should look like, and ultimately went through an acquisition process and brought on board MyStrength, a digital behavioral health company as well. So we really aim to use connected devices like a blood glucose meter, blood pressure cuff, and then add in all of our sort of deep data science bench to use AI to customize and personalize the experience for every member so they can have personalized, actionable insights wherever they are, whenever they need it.
Great. Now, Michelle, I want you to tell us a little bit about Houston Methodist, but one of the things that we'll get into in a minute that I love about you is that you have a dual role at Houston Methodist, both as the VP of IT and the VP of Innovation, We're going to find out just how handy that comes in. But tell us a little more about Houston Methodist.
Sure. Houston Methodist is a large academic health system, of course, in Houston, Texas. We have 7 hospitals, a research institute, physician organization. We have around 24,000 employees. And of course, just speaking as of the dual roles, my role is one, as 50% of my role is within the traditional IT, what you would think about over our corporate revenue cycle systems. My other 50%, of course, is focused in on Center of Innovation.
So why don't we start with that then? The Center of Innovation is a unique program in the sense that it's fully integrated. You have representatives from across the company, leaders, which really helps you incubate, I would say, at scale. So tell us a little more about that.
Sure. Well, of course, innovation's not new to Houston Methodist. We've got several clinical and research innovations, but what we are focused on, of course, is the digital technology that is just exploding across the United States today. And when we started our program, it kind of started as a grassroots effort with many individuals across the organization who were just kind of keeping up with what the latest technology was. And so we started meeting as a group, and as what unique to what people mostly do, you name your group, and we named ours DIOP. And DIOP stands for Digitally Innovative Obsessed People. And we were truly obsessed with what was going on with the new technology that was out there to help us better engage our patients, work to provide solutions for our physicians. And so when we officially named ourselves as the Center for Innovation, we had learned that many organizations had created these separate siloed groups, and they weren't really functioning well. So we decided that it was probably best for us to keep our traditional roles as well as our new roles with innovation. So our Chief Innovation Officer, Dr. Roberta Schwartz, she's also the CEO of our largest hospital in the Texas Medical Center, as well as myself. We have representation from HR to marketing to legal, clinical, our physicians. So we believe by having these dual roles, we're able to quickly take that new technology and embed it within the organizations as quickly as possible. And it's proven very effective for us.
So before we get into Livongo, Julia, one of the things that when we were prepping surprised me a little bit. So first of all, you joined Livongo about a year ago. Prior to that, you were the National Director of Mobile for Mental Health Services at the the Department of Veteran Affairs. And you told me 2 things. One, that it's the largest integrated healthcare system in the US. And this is the part that really shocked me, coming from the government, is that they are a model for sort of where healthcare is actually getting it right. And I was a little stunned, although once I thought about it, it made more sense. Tell us a little bit about your role and how that sort of helped, bring you to where you are today at Livongo.
Yeah, we get that a lot. And actually, I started at the Department of Defense before that. We were trained by NASA. So they were the very first ones to deploy computerized therapy to space. It turns out even astronauts, when they are in too close of proximity to each other for a long time, they ruin space missions with their interpersonal conflicts. So NASA was solving for that, and then they trained us. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, we serve about 6 million veterans, and it's an incredibly, it was an incredible opportunity to innovate and to really start some of the thinking that then disseminated out into commercial sectors. So we have a tremendous amount of need. So veterans returning with PTSD, with post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidality, et cetera. We have a huge geographic distribution. So 40% of veterans live 40 miles or more outside of the area of a major medical center. So rurality made digital interventions really important. And then we additionally have the incredible benefit of top-down control in the system, so which cannot be underestimated, because we would build products. We could build products for our reluctant consumers of mental health care, which is most veterans and active duty service members, or we could build products to optimize the in-person care that they're getting and make that care more efficient, more aligned with clinical practice guidelines, and we could directly talk to all the clinicians and enforce training and utilization of digital services, which gave us an incredible loop back to understand really deeply what works and what doesn't work for clinicians in the context of face-to-face care.
Well, it's great. And so this leads into the next question, which is, and the speaker before us broke the swearing ice, but there's this thing called bullshit bingo, right? And I feel like in the innovation space, particularly in healthcare innovation, there's a lot of buzzwords that get thrown around and a lot of technologies that I think people are like, really, are you really using virtual reality and AI and all that? But as we got into our discussion, as we were getting ready for this session, you both actually independently hit on this theme when I asked you, where is innovation really working? So before we get into those technologies, and Julia, I'll start with you. You had a really important premise for like, if you're looking as a company to implement innovation into your system, what are some of the basic rules you need to start with to make sure it's not just a shiny object?
Yeah, I think that for me, the era of one-off apps that person can put into the App Store is over or should be over soon. That what we really need in order to support health, real health in this country, is the thoughtful integration of those products into the existing healthcare system. So not having these siloed impacts, but instead really thinking about who is the clinician, what is their workflow, who is the user or member, what is their life flow for the 99.9% of their life that they're not in the clinic, and understanding your place in that ecosystem, having a little bit of humility, and maybe even changing the metrics that you look at as metrics of success. Maybe the amount of time that eyeballs are on your product is actually not the best measure of a person's mental health, for example, or physical health. That the more transparent you can become and fit into existing structures, I think the more likely we are to be successful at actually helping people with real health problems, not just wellness.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so I know you both have the commonality of using voice, which it's funny, and in listening to this conference, there is a little bit of a backlash from consumer voice, and is Alexa and Google and all those, are they listening in too much? But Michelle, one of the things that you all are doing, which I really love because it's helping clinicians or nurses, doctors avoid turning their back and doing this the whole time. It's a pilot that you're doing with Notable. Sure. Talk a little bit about the Apple Watch meets note-taking for the physicians.
Notable, yes, it's a company that we are doing a pilot with right now. It's allowing the physicians to really spend more engaging time with the patients. As we know with the EMRs or EHRs today, physicians, clinicians are spending a whole lot of time putting in data and really not paying attention and building that rapport exactly with the patient. And so what the Apple Watch and Notable are doing right now is they're really taking the data that's coming from the physician on how when they're speaking to the patient and being able to take that information then and embed it back into the EMR so that they are spending more time. And we believe really that's kind of the wave of where we should be taking voice, is really helping our physicians and our clinicians spend more engaging time with the patients face to face than having to spend it in front of the computer screen as they're asking the questions.
So, Julia, your president, Jennifer Schneider, I saw at the health conference recently, and she was on stage with Missy Krasner, who leads the Alexa partnership for Amazon, and Dr. Razu Shrestha from Atrium Health. And let's talk a little bit about how this weird conical device or little button that sits on our counter that we say play music or turn off the lights, how is it actually helping people to be healthier? And in particular with Livongo, what are you using voice technology for?
Yeah, so at Livongo we have a sort of unique partnership with Amazon and their Alexa product to connect our devices so that a person can ask Alexa for their blood sugars. They can say when the last time they took their reading was, and so it's really about just keeping the person informed. That's sort of at the bedrock of Livongo's care, is about keeping people engaged with their metrics to the extent that that dictates their behavior, which in many chronic conditions like diabetes, it's very critically important. I think what Dr. Schneider was talking about additionally on the stage is how do we use Alexa to consider the needs of the whole person. And really, as a psychologist who used to actually do psychotherapy, I can say it's a really fascinating opportunity. Voice to me as a psychologist is incredibly interesting because it is the only form of medical practice where the conversation is actually both the diagnostic mechanism and the treatment mechanism. So you don't need any biometric data of any other kind to perform therapy. It's great if you've got your eyes on your patient. That's right. a big benefit. But there's an incredible opportunity there. At the same time, all of the content is very personal, and so it does potentially exacerbate some of some of those privacy concerns and just needing to make sure that you've got a secure way to handle it.
Right. Now, Michelle, we were talking this morning. You talked about a new possibility where if you're in the doctor's office, using voice to schedule an appointment and even to have a referral to a specialist. I think any of us that have ever been to the doctor's office, you're with your general practitioner and they're like, oh yeah, you have to go see a dermatologist or whatever. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's kind of a little bit beyond just in voice, and it really gets into the whole virtual care process. And what we're really trying to promote throughout within Houston Methodist is, not necessarily do you have to come within our four walls to be able to gain care through Houston Methodist. You could do that through a virtual visit. But that's kind of just the one-on-one patient off. But think about when you are in the physician's office, you've gone to senior primary care, and they're now needing to refer you to a specialist. Well, wouldn't it be nice that you could always, just have that virtual visit right there from your primary care's office into that specialty so that potentially you could go ahead and take care of that appointment right then. So we really believe that kind of voice extended beyond just in virtual is going to help kind of facilitate getting care much sooner than it is having to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks of being able to get into that specialist when you can do it right there from your primary care.
So getting down to the brass tacks, we did talk about how this is moving the needle, and you have a couple of great examples which we'll touch on before we wrap up. But I know one of the things that you said to me, Julia, that I really liked was in talking about artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning, again, another like bullshit bingo term we hear way too much. But you said that part of the value of that, and I think this works at Livongo, is the precision that you can get to when you're able to chew through all of that data, ingest that data. So talk a little bit about the precision in medicine that you can get from this.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. Again, my perspective is always informed by the 27 years of graduate school that I did to get my doctorate, but I think of it from a psychotherapy perspective. If a person walked into my office with a certain depression score and another person walked in with the same depression score, I would not treat those two people the same. I need to know the demographics of those people. I need to know the resources that they have available to them. I need to know various pieces of their family backgrounds in order to choose the appropriate intervention. And somehow that expertise of the provider gets lost in a lot of our digital innovations, where we really need to start with one size fits all and then build incrementally, iterate, fail fast, and iterate in theory. And really what's behind that iteration is the need to understand this specific person in this specific moment, what do they need? And so Livongo has our AI engine, so we aggregate data from our devices, from our PBM partners, from various sources, bring that in, interpret it, figure out what this individual needs in this moment, push them an actionable insight right now, have them test it, and then iterate and just go around again. There is no non-personalized care. It doesn't make any sense. And I think that in certain domains, like cancer, you see that there are massive, massive movements forward due to the ability to use big data techniques to personalize medicine. And I think, hopefully that expands out across the entirety of the medical field.
And Michelle, one of the things I love that you're doing is anyone that works in the medical profession, or probably even if you don't, hiring nurses is an incredibly difficult job. There are too few of them. You have a chatbot that you started to use, and I think the metric was you've hired 28 nurses using that chatbot, which may not seem like a ton, but given how hard it is and the fact that this is playing a role, tell us a little bit about that.
And it's how we got to that. So if you stop and think about when most people are looking for employment, they're doing it at night. They're not doing it during the day. And so with this chatbot, which we've called Mia, our Methodist Interactive Assistant, is now able to chat with these nurses at night about potential employment with Houston Methodist. And yes, through that process, we have now been able to hire 28, it's probably more than that now, through just starting off with this chat technology. Since it's been so successful, we're now moving into other areas, IT, where it's been a little bit more difficult for us to find certain positions. But it's been extremely beneficial, instead of having staff that work through the night, of being able to better engage with just employees. So for innovation for us, it's, yes, there's the health side of it, but then there's also to our employee side on how we're better trying to engage potential employees.
So I know we're bumping up against time. Tweetable thought, looking at one of the questions I asked is 5 to 10 years out, what do you see happening? Julia, let's start with you.
Absolutely the user, the consumer, the patient at the center of the experience, flexibility around them where we have more porous boundaries between healthcare systems and home management, the utilization of the devices that are most integrated into our actual lives so that we are taking up less of a person's time and energy being absorbed in our products so that we can actually support them to live better and healthier lives.
Awesome, thank you. Michelle?
I totally agree with
So you're going to retweet
Julia.
her is what you're saying?
Well, I'm not going to retweet
Live
her, but
retweet.
I would just say that I think it is going to be what you're really going to, and I hate to say 5 to 10 years because technology is changing so fast, but that we are really going to see this explosion of how you can get healthcare not in the traditional ways of what you think about it today. I think you're really going to see beyond where it is that we can start getting healthcare in forms that the way that we as consumers and patients want to get it, and then also being able to help our clinicians provide that care in those non-traditional forms.
Great. Well, we are out of time, so thank you all for listening. Julia, Michelle, thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Take one seat over here. Thank you, Joaquin. So, good morning so far. Everyone's enjoying sticking in it with us on our third day. So, Joaquin Duato is as Sean graciously introduced him, is the vice chairman of the executive committee of Johnson & Johnson. He's been there 30 years. Now responsible for the company's pharmaceuticals and consumer sectors, supply chain, IT, global services, health and wellness, pretty much everything, right?
Thank you.
But as a business person, you had a sort of recent unique opportunity to step into the role as CIO. Talk a little about what facilitated that and sort of what you learned as a business person sitting in that role.
Thank you. So this January, the CIO of Johnson & Johnson told me that he was going to leave the company and go to work somewhere else. So as I have the responsibility for technology, without having any technology background, I had to step into the role of CIO, the acting CIO, or as I call myself, the accidental CIO. And it was a wonderful opportunity. It enabled me to see the things from other perspectives that I never saw. I had an opportunity to understand better how technology was impacting all the areas of the company and how technology was in different places in Johnson & Johnson. I was able to understand better how the technology organization and the rest of the organization have to work together and how the roles of the people working in technology and the people working in the business, in research and development, or in the functional groups are starting to converge in many cases. And they need to upskill both the technology organization to be a better partner with the rest of the group and to move from the back office in which they were working more to the front line, and at the same time, the business leaders and the R&D leaders to be more knowledgeable about what technology can offer and to be more able to distinguish what is hype from what is reality. You know? And I try to apply a skeptical mentality. We are an R&D-based company. In R&D, you are very skeptical about things. It's all about data and being able to see things. So in technology, there is a lot of hype. So we try to give that skepticism mentality for everybody too.
Great. So J&J is 130 years old. And you know, one of the things we talked about when we spoke this week is obviously big companies wind up in the news. There's a lot going on with J&J. There's been questions. Talk a little about the state of J&J, some of the most recent news, and sort of how the company is addressing what's going on.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, we have 130 years of history. And we would not have 130 years of history if we were not doing some things right. So during 130 years, our focus has been trying to address in healthcare some of the bigger problems. And I hope we have some opportunity to discuss that later. And in doing that, the quality and the safety of our product has always been our #1 priority. As any big company, we always have something and issues going on. And in particular, lately, we have issues associated with talc that you may have seen in the press, or even opioids. And while we sympathize with everybody that's going through health problems, either opioid crisis or cancer, what we have tried to communicate through our court filings and press releases is that we believe that the company always acted appropriately, based on the science, based on the facts, and based on the law. So we'll continue to work with all stakeholders to address these problems, but it's important for me to say very clearly that we wouldn't be here after 130 years if patients and consumers were not our priority.
Right. And I want to encourage, I mean, we've been here for 3 years in the ballroom, that I'm not going to wait to the very end for Q&A. So please, at any point, we want to make sure this is conversational, that if you have a question, I'll be looking and scanning the audience. Please keep your hand up. We have the mic handlers. But so one of our theme for this event has been reset and restore. And it's really been talking about the responsibility of business towards making the world a better place. Your CEO, Alex Gorsky, has been sort of on the front lines of the business roundtable discussion of stakeholders over shareholders. Would love to hear your perspective and J&J's perspective on what does that really mean when we talk about stakeholders over shareholders, and do you need to change what you've been doing, or is this more of the same, it's just a message? Talk a little about that.
Thanks for the question. We have a set of principles in Johnson & Johnson that we call our credo, that last year was its 75th anniversary, that states our responsibilities with 4 stakeholders. The first one's the patients and consumers that use our products. The second one, the employees at the company. The third one's the communities. And the fourth one, the shareholders. And we believe that only when we are able to align the interest of these 4 stakeholders, we're going to be able to produce a result for the long term. In the short term, there's always going to be tensions between different elements of these four stakeholders. Over the long term, you are going to agree with me that you are only going to be successful if you are able to align the interests of the community, your employees, the consumers and patients you serve, and your shareholders. So for us, that is a way of operating, and we want to think that we can use our size and scope and scale to do good things. And we try to do in many different ways. Recently, for example, we announced that we were donating 500,000 doses of an Ebola vaccine in Central Africa to address that epidemic. So those are the type of things that a large healthcare company can do in order to address some of the global health challenges.
So, in the room here, we have a bunch of people from the technology industry, and we've seen this trend over the years of every company saying now they're a tech company, right? No matter if you're in financial services, a lot of companies in healthcare. I know we did an interview with you for the magazine, and talk a little about sort of J&J not necessarily as a tech company, but as an enabler of sort of innovation.
Thank you. We are not a tech company. Neither we want to be a tech company. And we are a healthcare company. What we do is we have rigorous biological and discovery and development process to come up with breakthrough medicines, medical devices, and consumer health products. And that's not what technology companies do. So in that sense, technology companies are a partner for us, are very important in enabling and amplifying our business, but they are not competitors. So we have multiple partnerships with technology companies. One of them, for example, in our medical device sector with Google in developing robotic surgery. Or we announced about a year ago a large clinical study together with Apple to identify patients with atrial fibrillation using the Apple Watch. So we do work with technology companies, and technology, it's across the entire value chain in a company like Johnson & Johnson, from discovery to development to manufacturing to commercialization. But that's not the core of what we do for society. The core of what we do for society is to bring medical devices, medicines, consumer products that impact people's health.
So you mentioned the Apple relationship, the Healthline study. This is the first use of a sort of a consumer-grade wearable in a clinical setting. For those who don't fully understand how you're working with Apple, I think it would be interesting to talk about sort of how different it is from a lot of us think about Fitbit and just tracking our steps and is the data actionable. Tell us a little about what you specifically are doing with Apple.
So with Apple, we are focused in trying to diagnose early a disease called atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation, it's an abnormal heart rate that creates poorer blood flow that can lead into a stroke. And it's a very frequent case of hospitalization in the US. There are about 750,000 hospitalizations due to atrial fibrillation in a year in the US, and about 130,000 people die because of atrial fibrillation leading into a stroke. So what we are trying to do with Apple is utilizing its Apple Watch to identify patterns that will lead us to diagnose earlier atrial fibrillation in order to be able to avoid the consequences of that. About 30% of the patients today are not diagnosed early enough because sometimes the disease is silent, and if we were able to identify those patients through an Apple Watch and the ECG app that they have there, we would be able to really have a significant impact on health. And that's only one example of what we can do with wearables. We also recently announced that we are starting another study in heart failure, which is going to be a clinical study to seek an indication for one of our medicines in which patients will not have to visit for study reasons, the clinic. So it would be totally virtual and completely decentralized. Through digital, we can do clinical studies, or we can reach to very large populations in a way that we were not able to do before. And in that, technology really plays a role, because without technology, we wouldn't be able to accumulate the amount of data that we require, and without technology, we wouldn't be able to decipher the patterns that are going to help us identify the disease earlier.
Right. I'm just looking around to see if you have any questions. You talked about, so we're talking about partnerships, right? So ecosystem development, innovation that doesn't only have to come from within, but through these relationships. J&J has set up a variety of ways where you bring in innovation and partner, things like J Labs. How important is that, and sort of what is the strategy as you see startups coming in and trying to disrupt healthcare? And how do you work with the earlier stage companies who may not fully understand the regulatory environments or scaling to the size they need to? What have you learned from the startups, and what do you think J&J is able to help educate the smaller
Yeah, that's
companies?
a great question. When you have a company as large as Johnson & Johnson, one of the important things that you realize is that you don't survive 130 years if you don't understand that most of the innovation is not going to happen within your boundaries. Innovation is happening everywhere, and it doesn't necessarily need to happen within the boundaries of Johnson & Johnson. So you have to embrace open innovation, and you have to insert yourself in the ecosystems where innovation is occurring. So what we have done during the past decade is to create a system to be able to partner with startups, academia, health tech, biotech companies early on. And we call that our innovation centers, and within our innovation centers, a system of incubators that we call J Labs. We have 13 J Labs here in the US and internationally. We have about 500 companies, startups in residence. Some of them have become public and graduated from J Labs. We have done agreements with about 100 of them, and it's a way that enables us to stay very connected with the innovation ecosystem in the area and to identify the innovation earlier on, so they can benefit from our scale in developing, in manufacturing, and commercialization, and we can benefit from their ingenuity in identifying product solutions in a way that we may not have been able to do it.
And I think when I learned about J Labs first, and I had met Melinda, actually I interviewed Melinda on stage here last year, it's a unique model, right? It's a non-equity model, so you're not taking a piece of the company, but really building these strong bonds and sort of finding those mutually beneficial sort of relationships.
Absolutely. What really makes this model so successful is that it's a no strings attached model. So we are the landlord of the companies being there, but we provide an ecosystem in which they can learn from each other, and they can be endorsed by the fact they are within our incubator system, and that enables them to have better access to different systems like venture capital or better training opportunities to understand how to develop the products. And even in some cases, we even provide some mentorship to some of these companies to help them developing their own products. In many ways, what we learn from the startups is the sense of urgency, which is always required in a large company like we do. And what we would bring to them, as I said, is the scale and the ability to have an impact that alone they would not be able to have.
Great. I think we have a question down here.
Wondering whether you were aware of or re-engineering the JLabs idea. I was wondering whether or not you had a point of view on open source pharmaceutical research and whether or not you'd be willing to share the findings from JLabs and other research that you're doing with the medical community so that others may benefit from it.
Everything that they do in JLabs is their own thing, so we don't have any rights or any property on the IP that the people at JLabs develop. It's their own property. Overall, I think that there's great opportunity to work open source in areas that I would call pre-competitive, in order to understand better the biology of the disease, in order to understand better the mechanisms that may trigger the disease, working in biomarkers and diagnostics. I do think that in those areas, it's a great way of companies working together to try to address what are going to be the beginnings of identifying therapies, cures, or interventions.
I think we have another question right back here.
I was wondering, we hear a lot about the lack of alignment today in the healthcare system when it comes to, insurance companies' needs and pharmaceutical companies' needs and medical institutions' needs, and then the patient at the center of that, and the economics are all misaligned. I'm wondering if there's anything that comes out of innovation work that breaks that lack of alignment, something around transparency or something that's going on in your world that will help us push through that morass we hear about all the time.
You raise a great point on what the impact of technology could be in the healthcare ecosystem. Certainly, the fragmentation that the healthcare ecosystem has creates a lot of noise that translates in not optimal care and creates a lot of friction that translates into additional expenses. So technology could integrate better through information the different aspects of care, and hopefully it's going to help, if not align, at least eliminate the noise and the friction that the system has today.
So, because we only have a couple more minutes, so as you sit across, multiple of your business lines, consumer, pharmaceutical, what excites you the most right now? I mean, where do you see innovation taking us in, any of your businesses? I mean, what's most exciting to you?
It's exciting to see what is happening in science now and the possibilities that new treatment modalities may bring. When I think in the area of pharmaceuticals, what cell therapy can do utilizing your immune system to combat cancers, or what gene therapy can do, in a single dose being able to cure an inherited disease. Or even the possibilities that we were talking before about the microbiome and how we can rebalance your microbiome to address some immunological diseases, or the combination of robotics and digital in robotic surgery. So we are in a position now in which science is giving us opportunities to address some of the biggest challenges that we have in front of us, like cancer or Alzheimer, in many different ways. And hopefully, even to be able to identify some of the diseases before they appear. One of the things that we are trying to do within Johnson & Johnson, we have an initiative that we call World Without Disease. Oftentimes, when the disease manifests and we can diagnose it, it's too late. For example, in lung cancer, for example, in Alzheimer, or even in diabetes. So we try to understand what are the changes that occur before the disease manifests itself in order to diagnose patients earlier and to come up with interventions that may arrest the development of the disease. And in that context, technology is also very important because it's also by the collection of large amounts of data that we can find the patterns in order to identify the disease earlier enough to have this type of interventions.
So I think, based on Lewis's point, move it from, I think the industry starts to call it sick care, right, to healthcare, right?
Absolutely.
So how do we use data, how do we use technology to prevent rather than just sustain, right? So, so great, Joaquin, thank you for joining us. Let's give a round of applause to Joaquin. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Chief Scientific Officer at Platypus Neuro, Dr. Amy Cruz.
That's how it should be.
Right on top.
Well, good morning. Thank you for continuing to join us for this morning's session. It's been my absolute pleasure. I'm actually a first-time techonomist, and so really happy to be here to share something about human intelligence this morning. We've been talking a lot about machine intelligence, but I do want to reinforce some of the messages around neuroscience. So I'm a neuroscientist. Actually, I'll talk a little bit more about my background later. But I am the Chief Scientific Officer at Platypus Neuro, and as I've been having conversations this week with folks, I've been here all week, a lot of people have asked me, who is Platypus Neuro? So we're actually an applied neuroscience company that is using neurotechnology to actually enhance and upgrade individuals' performance. The reason that we can do this is because our first offering is called the Human 2.0 Brain Upgrade Program. And so what we're actually doing is assessing individuals, measuring their brain activity, and then actually helping them induce that plasticity that we actually heard about earlier this week to actually enhance their performance. One of the reasons, so a little bit about me, I'm actually a former DARPA program manager, so I'm a neuroscientist who specialized in human performance in the defense industry. And so we actually developed a lot of technologies around training, enhancement, accelerated learning that actually allow us to now roll this out into the commercial space. So we've been around just a little less than 3 years. I've been there, I'm one of the co-founders, and so very excited about this technology. So why, when we talk about an upgrade, when I talk about Human 2.0, right, we saw those beautiful charts from Tristan yesterday, right? You saw the curve of technology going up like this, you saw the curve of humanity going down like this, right? And so traditionally, we've always relied on technology to give us an upgrade. But essentially, we're kind of at that point in our life cycle here where technology is no longer an upgrade to us in so many ways, it's actually an overload. So if you saw the little sort of icon that Tristan had for overload, we're essentially at the point where technology pretty much is overwhelming us. It's not actually helping us that much anymore. And so one of the things that we know about plasticity, neuroplasticity, is that we actually have the ability to rewire our brains. And so one of the things that we're talking about, why we're talking about an upgrade, is that we can actually now think about upgrading our brains in maybe the same way that we thought about upgrading our technology. So here's just a quick snapshot of the Human 2.0 brain upgrade. So the first thing that we do is we actually use very advanced brain sensing technology. It's non-invasive, so it's all external to the brain. But we actually use that technology to measure the individual's brain in real time while they're performing a battery of fairly simple tasks. What that allows us to do is actually put together essentially a map of their performance, not just their behavioral performance, but their brain performance that will then point to the ways that we can actually help them upgrade themselves. So then we implement a training program that involves both cognitive training, so brain training, right, but very scientifically efficacious, and neurofeedback paradigms that allow the individual to then engage in this upgrade themselves. And then what we do is we come back, we track that, we're actually able to see not only the changes in performance, productivity, whatever it is, right, but actually in the context of their brain networks changing themselves. So we've been working with professional sports clients, corporate executives, financial traders, in ways of actually getting them sort of up into new levels of performance, again, using human intelligence. I just wanted to provide a couple, one sort of piece of data. So this is actually from one of our corporate partners, Fujitsu Labs, in Sunnyvale, California, so a local company. And we actually engaged in an entire study with some of their corporate executives around actually implementing this brain upgrade program. So we recruited them. We actually did the whole study in the office, so we weren't in a lab. There was no need to be tucked away. We did everything at their offices. We scanned their brains. We built maps of how their performance looked. We then put them on their individualized brain upgrade programs, and actually saw at the end of 6 weeks, so this is about a half hour of training a day approximately, didn't have to be every day, but at least 5 days a week, 6 weeks of training. They not only increase, so this is a measure of cognitive efficiency. It's a measure of both how quickly you respond to things, but also how accurately you do. So as you add cognitive complexity to tasks, you often see people slow down, right? And of course, we age a little bit. As we age a little bit, we also slow down. So we actually saw an increase in cognitive efficiency after just 6 weeks of training, but even more impressively, we actually saw their brain networks change. So we actually saw their brains become more efficient at processing information, essentially meaning that their attention got better. In some cases, their memory actually got better, even though we didn't explicitly train for that. So it's really important to me that we also see the changes in the brain networks in addition to those behavior changes, right? And so then finally, one of the things was also self-report, right? So individuals who participated in the program and have continued to participate in the program actually say that they can actually feel those changes, which I think is one of the most important things associated with this. And then finally, I just wanted to give a future-facing statement. So the work that I showed you was actually a sort of our first offering, one of our first products. But the promise of neurotechnology is squarely on message with what we've been talking about here at Techonomy over the last few days. These technologies, these neurotechnologies, are not only going to be able to allow us to improve our own performance, but I believe that used sort of well and designed appropriately, they will actually be able to better connect us through shared humanity, through enhanced empathy, through human-machine teaming. So all of the topics that we've been talking about today, I think, are going to be enhanced by neurotechnology. And so one of the things I was thinking about as I was sitting here, I was like, how do we turn, you may have seen some neuroscience technologies or other things around, and I said, how do I turn, what we're doing is we're turning neuroscience from a sort of a novelty to a necessity. And I think that's where we're headed. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Amy. Obviously maybe it's not obvious, but I think it's probably obvious. When people hear about what you're doing, one of the first things that comes to their mind, I'm sure they ask you about this all the time, is the Matrix.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
But that's not what you're doing. You're not sticking probes in and changing everything.
No, this is all non-invasive technology.
So, and I guess I just wanted to clarify what it is exactly a little more.
Sure, of course.
So you're a neuroscientist. Your company has a tremendous insight into how the brain actually works even down, I assume, to the cellular level to some degree. But the way you manifest that knowledge in the behavioral modification is through gaming and things like that.
Yeah,
right?
it's essentially through, we can use games, we can use neurofeedback paradigms, meaning where an individual actually gets information about their brain state in real time and can use that to change their performance. We're starting to build, so obviously a lot of these things are either tablet-based or web-based or phone-based, but we're starting to build virtual reality applications as well. It's a very immersive environment that engages the brain. So yeah, lots of ways. Actually, there are many ways to stimulate plasticity in the brain. This just happens to be a very, very convenient and readily available one for working with these.
Presumably,
with these
it could be made quite inexpensive en masse if society chose to do that, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, because it certainly raises questions about the educational system. If we know this, right? And obviously, at this point, you're early. It's probably controversial even to believe that it works. But let's just say that were proven or shown to be relatively reliable, wouldn't we feel some incentive to put this in all our schools, for example?
Sure. Yeah. So just so you know, I often use this example, there's the old quote, like, why do people rob banks? It's because where the money is, right? One of the reasons that we're starting with elite performers is because we're trying to build the platform and build the industry, really, as we go. We are incredibly passionate about learning and education and how these techniques and tools can be used in those settings. It's just not, it's getting there, but it's not quite there yet. There are a lot of complexities in education for those of you that have ever tried to roll technology out into those environments. I mean, it's like both of my parents are teachers.
Like roadblocks is more the word.
So both of my parents are teachers. I'm passionate about education, but I think the delivery mechanism isn't quite there yet, but the science, I believe, will bear out and contribute
well,
there. Absolutely.
Again, at the high end, there are elite schools being built all over the world that are very expensive. Not that I'm advocating that necessarily, but do you think that some of those might start adopting elements of this, or are they already?
Absolutely. So one of the things that that we've looked at, both in terms of our sports clients and how to get, if you're working with elite sports clients, is it the case that you want to get into then a fitness center, or you want to, get a little bit closer to the consumer that way? That may be a good way. Within education, there are certainly, the learning centers and the tutoring centers and other places that may be an excellent next step in terms of getting this technology closer to the consumer without having it to be something that everybody has in their house or may go throughout school districts. So that's an opportunity.
Who has a question or a comment?
I love
Amy?
questions.
Oh, right there in the very front. Okay, get the mic there.
Hi, my name is Drew Lehman. I just want to say it's super cool that you used to work at DARPA. I read the book, The Imagineers of War, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm a former employee at Lumosity, which has a similar premise as to what you're doing. I'm curious to see how you guys are interpreting the results of your experiments and looking at it in the context of, are people just getting better at the game, or how does that translate to
thank you so much
what
for
they're
that
doing?
question. That's a great question. Thank you. I actually forgot to mention one point that was really critical, which is our assessment that we use sort of before and after training is entirely independent from the actual cognitive training tasks themselves. So not only are we confirming through an independent measure of assess and train, assess and track at the end, but then confirming with the brain data at the end really allows us to see how the brain networks have changed. So it's absolutely not just training to the tasks, because we measure on a separate task, and then also we have the brain activity itself to give us sort of more confidence about the changes that are happening. Thank you for that question. It's fabulous.
Is there any element of geopolitics in this? We've talked a lot about U.S.-Chinese competition.
Sure.
I mean, is this an area where there is any kind of geographic specialization? Is there more progress in China? Where do you see interest elsewhere in the world?
So neuroscience is probably one of the most internationally diverse fields. When our Society for Neuroscience conference gets together, it's 35 to 40,000 people from across the globe. I would say that progress is I always think that we're a little bit of ahead, primarily because of some large investments like the BRAIN Initiative and other things that the government has done. But absolutely, scientists throughout Asia, Europe, elsewhere have been making big advancements, both in terms of the technology itself, the hardware measurement technology, but also the uses for it and how it's being applied.
So I guess I'm getting at the question that applies in so many areas these days. Is there any reason to worry that if we don't take up this kind of work more broadly in the United States, that other countries will bypass us in some way?
Absolutely, yeah,
yes?
Absolutely.
And the same is true of sports teams, I'm sure. But
absolutely. As a matter of fact, we're behind on sports.
Okay.
The U.S. system is behind on using neurotechnology and psychology in sports.
So you are worried that we need to make sure we stay working because others will bypass us and gain more capabilities. That's a kind of a weird way to think about the world. It's like more, asymmetrical brain evolution or something like that.
Well, but I mean, we are trying to build an industry here, right? We are trying to build a neurotechnology industry that will impact, like I said, it'll turn it from a novelty to a necessity, right? We want to impact many lives.
Wow.
And to do that, we need platforms to do that.
Well, thank you so much for coming here to tell us about it.
Thank you for having me. This is so fabulous.
We've loved having you. Thanks so much. Okay, now for a treat. David Plouffe, if you're back there, which I hope you are, come on out. Hi, good to meet you. I'm sorry I've been so busy out here. I haven't had a chance to greet you in the green room. It's really an honor to have you. David Plouffe is a legendary figure in American government and politics, the architect of President Obama's 2 presidential campaigns, an advisor in the White House for much of Obama's presidency, somebody who's still very close to all those people, deeply enmeshed in the Democratic Party. Currently, you must be spending a lot of time on your podcast because it's really good and you're getting a lot of great guests. He has a podcast called Campaign HQ, which I am already addicted to. And if, like me, you're kind of obsessed with this bizarre, complex Democratic primary process, that's what he's focusing on mostly at the moment, and certainly we'll talk about a lot of that today. But he also was a policy executive and consultant or internal advisor at Uber for a while, which must have been interesting in retrospect especially, and also has been working and still works with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, although I guess you've pulled back a little bit of your time commitment to that. So if we have time, I'd love to talk to you about all that, but we got to start with politics, obviously. You know, looking at the political landscape right now, well, maybe just say, what are you most excited about? What are you most worried about? Big picture.
As it relates to the campaign itself?
Everything. The country.
Well, the country. Well, young people give me excitement. People who are starting businesses, people in high school and college who are organizing and activists for change. You know, I don't think much is going to change in our government. So I talked to many of the CEOs who are thinking about running for president in this last, one may still, but most of them decided not to.
Really?
And it was fascinating to me.
Not Howard Schultz, right?
Well, yeah, I talked to him and
no, but he's not.
He's not running, right?
Not to, right?
But
oh, you mean the one that might?
Yeah. So all
Bloomberg.
folks from business, like, hey, listen, this Congress thing, like, I've got a board. I figure out how to move my board forward. I'll figure it out in Congress. And you know, listen, most of the people in your own party, the most charitable thing you can say is their self-interest they put above the president's, right? And then the other party is sort of sworn to decapitate you. So you know, if we're looking for big, whether it's a long-term deficit deal, comprehensive immigration reform, the things we need to do from a governmental standpoint on climate, they're not impossible. They're going to be really hard. I think if we get
into regardless of who's elected?
Regardless of who's
regardless
elected.
of whether the Democrats get it?
Yeah, because I think the upper ceiling for a Democrat in the Senate right now is probably 53, 54. So unless you get rid of the filibuster, I think the Senate's going to be pretty close for the next decade. So by definition, things need to be bipartisan, and by definition, things in Washington rarely are these days. So you know so for the foreign policy side of the ledger, the president obviously and their administration has massive control over. And so that will change overnight if we elect a new president. But domestically, it's not all of a sudden like we're going to have a new day in Washington and Congress is going to get along.
But it would be a lot better. If the Democrats won. I mean, I assume you believe that very deeply.
Yeah, so, you know, not quite half the country, maybe 46% of the country feels otherwise, right? So, yeah, but my concern is if Trump gets another 4 years, that's not a doubling of the effect. It's a compounding effect. Okay, we're never going to get back into the Paris climate.
You mean it's exponential?
Yeah, meaning the planet is probably too far gone. I think right now...
Don't laugh, whoever laughed.
No.
It's not funny.
It's not funny. You know, if you think about...
I might have laughed, but it's seriously not funny.
The deficits, which don't get enough attention, are the largest deficits we've had since World War II. We were involved in a global war.
Well, he just spends
so
money.
It's going to get worse and worse and worse. Doesn't care about it. So that's going to end up saddling us for generations.
He was when he went bankrupt.
Right. But the bigger concern for me is the attacks on democratic institutions. He is acting this way and behaving this way, having to face the voters. Okay? When he doesn't have to do that anymore, I think all bets are off. The other thing that concerns me is there is going to be a generation of mostly young white men who thinks this is the way to act and this is the way to get ahead. And I think we're going to be paying that price for decades and decades. So this is not simply like, is it a blue jersey or a red jersey? I do feel more strongly about this. I think this is one of the most important dates in American history, November 3rd, 2020, not just election days. And it's going to be a super close race, and Trump has a very, very good chance to win re-election.
Has anything he's done stood out as particularly disturbing to you? I mean, for me, it was the pardoning of the three military criminals, pardoning them immediately. That to me was kind of a shocking. I mean, talk about reinforcing bad traits on the part of a lot of Americans. How could you think?
Well, I guess I didn't see I saw coverage. He was tweeting and attacking Lieutenant Colonel Vitamin today.
Just now.
So I think. So here's one thing that surprised me. Folks forget, when Trump won, one of the reasons he won is there were voters out there who say, you know, he doesn't seem like a reflexive Republican. He actually thinks it's okay to have transgender bathrooms, and he says he wants to tax carried interest, and he actually said he thinks people have health care. You cannot underestimate that. I saw a lot of research heading into the election. Voters in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania said, you know what, I don't think he's just going to throw in with the Republicans in Congress, and he did. That's the big surprise. Because if Trump had taken a different tact, tried to do infrastructure with the Democrats, which they would have done, handle the tax debate differently, healthcare differently. He's already right now, I think, an even money chance to win your election, but I think he'd be greatly advantaged. But listen, at the end of the day, we've never had somebody this focused on their reelection. So I was there. Barack Obama had more than a passing interest in his reelection. So did George Bush, so did Ronald Reagan, so did Bill Clinton. Trump is obsessed with his reelection. That's why he had Powell in the Oval Office yesterday. It's why he harangues all the OPEC countries around gas production. And his campaign is actually incredibly focused right now and spending money. No incumbent president has ever been spending money this early in a campaign. He's spending tens of millions of dollars on Facebook and YouTube primarily in the battleground states, and it's going to give him a big advantage.
Wow. Okay, well, I know that you spent enormous time thinking about the Democratic primary battles. Just give us the sort of state of play in that, in your view, right now.
Well, probably like a lot of you, I don't even know who I'm going to vote for yet. It's very early. So I would say that it is incredibly early. Most of the voters in Iowa, in New Hampshire, and South Carolina, much less the rest of the country, haven't firmly decided who they're going to vote. So there's going to be a lot of fluidity. But there's the great winnowing will be upon us. Some people will drop out between now and Iowa, and others will have to get out, after Iowa and after New Hampshire. So the question for me really is when we come out of South Carolina, which is the gateway to the rest of the country, and South Carolina is an enormously important primary in both Democratic and Republican
More
parties.
important than the other ones coming up?
I think it is, because it's the gateway, it's the last one, and somebody who does really well in South Carolina with the African-American vote almost assuredly just 10 days later will do, or just a few days later will do well in other parts of the country. So who's alive after that, and how many candidates are alive? If Joe Biden's alive after South Carolina, it means he somehow, some way found a way to right the ship. And then he's probably going to be the nominee because he's going to win the African-American vote. If he's not, and if it's just Mayor Pete and Sanders and Warren as the three, that's fascinating because none of them have a strong claim to the African-American vote. If somehow Harris or Booker or Deval Patrick can find their way through, they'll be advantaged. So that's the thing I'd encourage you to understand is it's not linear. And who those semifinalists and finalists are that the candidates themselves have no control over is going to be so important to the ultimate outcome. But I think we're going to get huge turnout. I think that helps some of the non-traditional candidates like a Mayor Pete. But what I'm interested in as a Democrat, as an American, is when things like there's some concern that this primary is getting too heated. This is like the most gentle pillow fight of all time. Like I want these people to knife each other because you're going up against Donald Trump. I want to see who can handle it.
Oh, they should be fighting harder now.
Harder now, with everything they've got, because. And I will tell you, I've led successful campaigns at every level of government here in the U.S. I'm not sure how you run against Trump day to day because of just the way he dominates the oxygen, okay? So you saw Hillary Clinton ran a flawed campaign in many ways, won all three debates by every statistical measure, had a better convention, had a better rollout of running mates. So those are the things she controlled, the big moments. The rest of the campaign, which was most of the rest of the time, Trump dominated. Just because she couldn't sort of get a word in edgewise. So I think whoever we nominate is going to have to figure that out, and that's going to be super complex.
Do you think any of the candidates now are showing better instincts about that in particular?
Well, they're not running against Trump. So by the way, I think Trump makes a mistake because he himself is only focused on Twitter, which is where most voters aren't, but it's a great filter. So Trump innately thinks social media first. His campaign is run by digital marketers. So I think there's no Democrat right now. Mayor Pete shows signs of it. Warren shows signs of it. Right. But the example I use is if you're going to go roll out your health care plan, your education plan, most of the Democrats are still thinking, well, what's the policy? That's a good thing. But, who am I going to give the first interview with? Is it the Times or the Post? And, where's my speech going to be? And what's the backdrop? Instead of thinking like, what's my Facebook and Instagram play on this? So that's my concern. That is the way the Trump campaign thinks.
It seems to me that Buttigieg understands that as well as anybody.
It's more native to him,
yeah.
Right? So he's the one I have the most hope, if he were the nominee, would run the most. It really has to be a Facebook and Instagram first campaign.
Right.
That has to be like your North Star, and everything sort of hangs from there. And that sounds to everyone in this room super obvious. But I think in politics, that translation hasn't happened all the way.
Talk about Deval Patrick, because that's an unexpected development and has a lot of provocative things about it. I know you know him very well.
Yeah.
Explain how you reacted.
I wish he had decided to run a long time ago. Yeah, I helped Deval win, election in Massachusetts, first African-American governor of Massachusetts, only second African-American governor in American history to that point. He's a remarkable person, and he's a political talent. He actually has he's got an amazing skill. Some politicians can kind of get a room standing up and applauding. He can quiet a room, make people think and listen. It's just
kind of like Obama, actually.
Yeah, but Obama could also reach the other way, but yeah, less a yeller and screamer. So the problem for Deval is it's really late. And so as much as there's fluidity, he has to, in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, recruit staff, recruit precinct captains who are your volunteer leaders, build a database of supporters. He's got to raise a ton of money, unlike Bloomberg, who basically can just plant his flag on Super Tuesday and spend $100 million and see what happens. So Deval is disadvantaged. So I think, and I spent some time talking to him about this, I think his personal situation changed. He was able to get in the race. He was concerned about what he was seeing, didn't see anybody who was a political savior. This is going to be a hard race against Trump. So it's just the degree, and here's the thing, even though it's early and there'll be a lot of moving around, I would say here in San Francisco, in New York, in Washington, in Boston, Democratic donors in particular are dissatisfied with the field. But the voters in Iowa and New Hampshire say, I'm pretty satisfied. I got young, I got old, I got left, I got center. Like, I'm okay, I got some choices. So I'm not sure there's the opening for a Bloomberg or a Patrick. They're hearing constantly from people in the Acela corridor and really from LA to San Francisco about this. I think in Iowa it's a different conversation.
Do you believe that, and one of the things that seems from my experience and what little I know about this is indispensable for the Democrats to win is black turnout. And is that something you agree, that if that can't be motivated to come at a higher level than Hillary succeeded, it's almost a game over?
You need it all, though.
Yeah.
So there's this very unhealthy debate, largely on Twitter, but not just on Twitter, on cable TV too, with Democrats saying we should be all base or all swing, okay? There's a simple math exercise. You're going to need it all, because here's what Trump's going to do. The one thing I'm certain of, Trump's going to get astronomically high turnout, okay? There's a mythology that says the unregistered voters in America benefit Democrats. Well, they do in California and they do in New York. In Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, and Michigan, there's a lot more people who aren't registered who look like Trump's base than not. He's going to blow out turnout. So the degree of difficulty for a Democrat gets higher. So yes, you've got to maximize African-American turnout and registration, Latino turnout and registration. You're going to have to max out the suburban vote, which has almost become a Democratic base, particularly with women, and young. But let's look at Wisconsin. Hillary lost Wisconsin by 23,000 votes. So she got 29,000 votes just in the city of Milwaukee than Obama. So you could say, man, if we just rectify that, we're fine. Do you want a margin for error of 6,000 votes? Of course not. She got 250,000 less votes than Obama in blue-collar and rural and exurban areas. Same thing in Pennsylvania. She actually got more votes in Philadelphia than Obama did, but in the suburbs outside of it, trailed. Well, particularly, Scranton, where Dunder Mifflin is from The Office, okay? Obama won it by 17 or 18, she won it by 2. Erie County in Pennsylvania, Obama won it by 16, she lost it by 10. Massive swings. And so so we need a Democrat who, okay, let's talk about Wisconsin. You have to get the kid who just moved to Madison from South Dakota to not just register and vote in Wisconsin, but volunteer. You've got to get the young 22-year-old non-college person, African-American in Milwaukee, to register, vote, and get active, and win back to 58-year-old iron worker in Racine who won Obama-Trump. You have to do it all, and if you don't, you're going to lose, and Trump's going to win. So that's what's required here, and particularly when you look at the number of votes Trump's going to get. I mean, the only state last time where I think he got close to getting to his ceiling was Florida, where he got almost 500,000 more votes than Romney did. Everywhere else, we didn't see that effect. And so you're going to see Trump, I think, really turn out. Listen, there's a lot of people out there who aren't currently wearing MAGA hats that will. And he'll get them out and he'll find them. And he's utilizing impeachment. That's what he's doing. So, really, really clever digital advertising to find people who currently aren't registered or might be registered and might vote for him but aren't volunteers and try and find them. So I think impeachment was the right thing to do as a citizen. I think this is far more serious than what Nixon faced and what Clinton faced or even Andrew Johnson. It should be looked at. Politically, I think it's very much an open question ultimately where the benefit's going to lie.
Wow, there's so many things I want to ask you about Silicon Valley and your work in other areas more recently, but I think we should go to the audience and let people in the audience direct how we prioritize from here. There's so many things to ask. Oh, nobody's got a hand up already? Jesus. Okay, how about right over there? I would love to ask you about Chan Zuckerberg, I'll tell you that.
My name is Long Wen, and my question is, what Democratic candidate do you think appeal most to Republicans? Because I think that's what it takes to beat Trump. Really somebody that can swing the southern state and that can relate to Republicans, not the other way around.
Right. So not to be impolite, but the math just doesn't suggest that. So the most a Democrat can probably get is 7 or 8% of Republican vote at the max. And by the way, that matters. So you want someone who doesn't get 4, gets 8. But this election will be decided by basically taking full advantage of turnout of younger voters and minority voters. And then there are swing undecided voters, more than people realize. Most of them aren't Republican or Democratic. They are independent voters, decline to state voters, depending on the state. So I would caution you not to look at it as who can get Republican votes. It's who can do 2 things with those voters. There are suburban voters who tend to be college educated, more highly income, a lot of women. Some voted for Trump last time, some didn't, but are feeling good about the economy and are open. And then there are mostly non-college, blue-collar voters who, these famous Obama-Trump voters, people didn't realize they existed, but they do, and they exist in fairly big numbers. So that's who you, now, you'll get some Republicans along the way in that as well. And my answer is, we don't know yet, because this campaign has not really started. It doesn't really get serious till after the holidays. And then, 1, who can deal with the scrutiny? Who can deal with the spotlight? And ultimately, this is about votes. Who can produce vote? Who can actually build the organization and attract the kind of support? So I'm not sure yet. I think the political view right now is a Biden or a Mayor Pete would have better chance at winning kind of the centrist voter, than a Warren or Sanders. I think that probably makes sense. But we'll see at the end of the day. There's no doubt that there are some voters out there who, are conflicted, who say, if I have an alternative I'm comfortable with, I'm going to vote against Trump. And so in that, I think there's a lot of people who believe that Biden probably fills that starring role most easily. Mayor Pete might. But they all have challenges. I mean, Democrats who want to beat Trump, what's pretty clear is we do not have a political athlete of such superiority that this is going to be an easy race. Wow. Okay? We're going to have to grind this out.
You said you thought the impeachment was a good idea, but it doesn't sound like you think there's any chance that anything that emerges from impeachment is really going to change the dynamic.
Not in the election, but I'm sort of tired of us viewing everything through a political posiation lens. Okay?
Oh, that's refreshing coming from you. Okay.
Well, is impeachment the right thing to do or not? Okay?
And
it's clear to me as an amateur student of history and an American citizen it is. But the politics of it, I think we have no idea. I know that Trump will try and leverage every ounce out of it, okay, on his side. Now, Trump doesn't really have playbooks, but I will guarantee you that he didn't want to enter his re-election year under an impeachment inquiry. So, it does. There are voters out there who they're exhausted. They basically say, I just want someone who's going to settle down, tweet less. I'm tired of hearing about Washington all the time. And so for those voters, the impeachment thing adds to that. This guy's just a lot of drama, right? But his messaging that say this is all, the Democrats have wanted me out since day one. They couldn't beat me in the election. Now they're trying to do it through the ballot box. That's effective with his base. I don't think it's particularly effective with swing voters. Right now, I think that the political challenge around impeachment is not whether the American people think he should be impeached or not. It's whether they think the impeachment inquiry was warranted and fair. And I think the testimony so far has been great, but it's during the day. Okay, so things have changed a lot. And so, back during even Clinton, much less during Nixon, 80, 90% of the American people were getting these really, really powerful moments. People aren't getting it today. And that's a challenge,
because
I think. People are working, they're not watching TV, they're not watching highlight, they may see a clip or whatnot. So the consumption of it, so Vindeman today, Sondland later in the week, Fiona Hill, I think if you were to have most Americans who aren't hardcore MAGA watch it, they would be disturbed by it. One of my concerns is I'm not sure that last mile is getting executed.
Interesting. Okay, could we get the house lights up a little bit? Here, and then here, and then here.
Mike Ellison. At risk of putting a big target on my back, I want to piggyback off the question there. I'm one of the few Republicans in the room. I'm not a Trump fan, And this is probably an election that in 25 years of voting, I could actually vote Democrat. But my concern is, and this is what I'd like you to opine on, as a Republican, I see a vicious lurch to the left of the Democratic Party. So if you put a Democratic president, even a moderate one, in office, it's the infrastructure that's going to follow him that concerns me. And I just kind of wonder what you think of that.
Right.
Great
Well,
question.
there's no doubt. I mean, one of my concerns as an American citizen is the left and right of both of our two political parties are getting more and more extreme. And I think that's only going to intensify. You know, you've got, you know, right now, I mean, this is, by the way, some of you may agree with this, but so I'm just reporting the news, but, you know, under 30, you know, most people who identify as Democrats would prefer this to be a socialist rather than capitalist country, right? Now, hearing, you know, when
Under
you
30, yeah.
yeah, when you understand their life, you can understand why some of them come to that conclusion. They're somewhat hopeless about their prospects. But I think that I would focus on this. If a Democrat's elected president, well, my guess is they will execute foreign policy. You may not agree with it all, but in a saner way, in a more methodical way, where we embrace more of our alliances and allies and less, you know, the autocrats. You know, they will have very little ability to execute on their legislative agenda. So for some of us, that may make us sad. For you, you may think that's a good thing, right? So, you know, you're not going to get Medicare for all done in all likelihood. So you'll probably figure out with the existing healthcare system, where could we make some changes? Maybe there's a hope for immigration reform finally, where we deal with both the border. And one of my concerns is there's a lot of Democrats right now who don't think there is such a thing as a border. President Obama spoke about this just a couple days ago. Of course there is. You're going to have to pair that with smart policies to allow legalization of the 11 million people here. You know, they're going to have to deal with a deficit. And, you know, historically, it is Democrats who've inherited, Democratic presidents have inherited massive deficits from Republicans, counter to type, and have done the tough political things. Both Obama and Clinton paid huge prices for doing tough things on the deficit. So my guess is I would optimize if I were someone like you on just normalcy. Okay? Washington's going to be fairly broken still. It's going to be very divided. So we're not going to be able to, through legislative means anyway. The only place where you could have somebody really take the wheel and go hard left or hard right is foreign policy. And I think all the Democrats are in a zone of reasonableness to that approach. So that, and I do think that, so the question is, there are Republicans out there. My sense is Republicans who are truly available to the Democratic nominee have a lot in common with some of the independent voters who might share the same kind of values. So let me give you some, Obama, when we won the landslide in 2008, we beat McCain by 7 points. You know, we won Indiana, so Obama got 11% of the Republican vote in Indiana. That was our high water mark. And my guess is the high water mark these days in a battleground state for Democrats more like 6 to 8. Just as Trump's going to try and get some Democrats. So in a close election, it all matters. But if I were you, I'd watch this. The character of these people matters a great deal to me. Like, one thing that frustrates me, and this, you know, I ran presidential campaigns, okay? So you'd think I'm the first person to say, let's optimize for who would be the best candidate. I want to focus on who would be a good president, okay? Who will be in that situation room? Who will be in the residence at night with a world leader at 2 o'clock having to make a life or death decision? Because in the White House, your campaign agenda, all your policies, that is a little part of every day because the world intrudes. And you want somebody who then builds a team that's calm, collected, intellectually curious, and may not ultimately make a decision you agree with, but you respect the process they went through. The truth is, my view is we've gotten damn lucky so far with Trump. Because if there's another 4 years, there will be the moment where the way he approaches these things, the self-interest, the lack of intellectual curiosity, the bad decision-making, the bad process, will really bite us in the rear end. So if nothing else, like I could get excited about that. Okay? Just someone's like going to sit in that situation room with the military leaders and civilian leaders around the table and run good process and make good decisions.
House lights, we do need, we'll leave them up. Over here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Beth Bannerman. I work for a biotech outside of San Francisco. David, I'm a big fan. Thanks for all your work. Listen to you on the podcast and Pod Save America as well. So. The question is, this feels to me as if it's a train on a track. We know where the train is going. So if we know that the Trump campaign is using digital marketing and advertising, why aren't we? So, or they don't have unique, special, magical tools. We have the same tools they do. Why are we not executing? We also know what the narrative is and how the narrative backfired in the election. So why are we not developing a counter narrative that has two tiers, one for the intellectual and the elite, the thinkers, the people who want a balanced leader in the cockpit, and the other who just want a bumper sticker and they want to feel safe and less scared? Why are we just not breaking it down into a simple approach like any other kind of game or battle where we have an opponent, we're going to go after them with a strategy against what their narrative is trying to put forward. For example, finally, he is essentially a reality TV star. How do we just remove his ratings?
Yeah. Well, I'd say one important point here, and I agree with, is 95% of how the race is going to be run in those questions will be decided by the Democratic nominee in their campaign. Okay? So this is why incumbents tend to win. Trump's got a massive advantage right now because he's focused on general election voters, building his organization, and not just online. They're doing online organizing. Already they're doing a better job offline organizing than they did in 2016 when they won because they've got time. So what my focus has been lately, along with some others, is to get some outside groups. I'm affiliated with a group now called Acronym. There's others, to be spending mostly digitally in these battleground states to reach voters on issues like the economy, healthcare, women's healthcare issues, character issues, to find out who's movable, why, who's not, and why, so that A, we're preventing Trump from raising his ceiling, because this race largely comes down to that. So Trump's going to drive up his registration and turnout, but he probably can't get to 50% of the vote in most states that he needs to. So he's going to try and drive a lot of vote to third party. So a Republican might say, hey, I'm not doing Trump again, but I can't do the Democrats, but I'm going to vote, so I'm going to vote third party. That killed Clinton in 2016. And so a lot of work has to be done, but that is really just triage work till we have a nominee. So the scale of difficulty for a nominee, they're going to come out of this primary broke, tired, a splintered party, and having run a completely different race to liberal, totally tuned in voters and have to switch on a dime. And Trump's going to be waiting there, okay, shooting from above, as every incumbent did. I mean, think what we did to Romney. Think what Clinton did to Dole. Think what Reagan did to Mondale. Think what Bush did to Kerry. Okay, we won the race before it started. So Trump's going to try and do that. And so I agree with you. So groups on the outside need to do all they can. And listen, the work I'm involved on now, we've learned a lot about how to move his economic approval rating down a little bit, how to really move him with healthcare. So that is all gifts we can hand to our eventual nominee. But that fight is basically a 5-month fight. That's what it is. Now, would I like to go into re-election with Trump's number in hands? Of course not. Okay? He's very weak and he's very vulnerable. But the advantage of incumbency, his ability to, I think, register a lot of new voters and turn them out, and he is a brilliant marketer. So it's not just how he uses social media to lift himself up. The way he defines Democrats is super effective. Listen, I've seen research recently with swing voters in battleground states like, hey, if a Democrat wins, I can't eat a hamburger or steak anymore. I can't fly on a plane. Okay? You laugh. You laugh. Okay? And it's very smart. So, so I agree there's a lot we can do. And so those of us who have some ability to do some good work between now and June need to do it. But this largely falls on them, okay? I don't know who them is, but I hope it's somebody who's tough and savvy enough. I do think, listen, I'm still privy to political research with voters, and this ratings thing is important. There is a growing number of people out there who are sort of just tired of the act, okay? They're tired of the act. And so impeachment, even though they might not sure, should he be impeached, should he not, they're like, it's another thing that's not about me, it's about him, okay? So I think we need to find a way to leverage that. I mean, it may be that ends up being a really important message in the last 5 months from our nominee is simply, you know what, it's less about like, I'm gonna completely change things. It's just, I'm gonna like settle things down a little bit. I think there's a lot of people out there, and not just centrists, even a lot of Democrats, like I think that's the thing a lot of people yearn for. And so it'll be interesting to see if we can land that plane.
Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap. But I don't know if you have any time to hang out for another 15 or 20 minutes. So many people would love to ask you questions.
Sure.
Not obligation, but
sure.
Wonderful to have you here. And if you don't mind just sitting there for a second for me to thank you all and say how wonderful it was to have all of you here, too. Oh, and Josh, you want to come up for a second? Did you get a copy of this?
Yes, I did.
You did? Okay, good. Anyway, well, thank you, David. Thank you so much for being here. That was
Thank you.
Fascinating.
So it was a jam-packed 3 days. We really appreciate you guys giving us your time and sticking out all the way to the end. Some last-minute housekeeping things, right? So thanks again to our sponsors. Many of them are still here: Accenture, Ericsson, Johnson & Johnson, IBM, Micron, Nestle Waters, and our agency W2O Group. So thank you again. Let's give a round of applause to the partners that help make this possible. You'll get an email probably before Thanksgiving, the next week or so, with more specifics around our upcoming programs in 2020. But back in New York, May 19th and 20th, back here 5 days after the 2020 election. So hopefully we'll take this conversation and see what happens. But so we encourage you all to come back next year. What else? There's lunch boxes out front for those of you who are catching cars and need to get to the airport.
That's an innovation, by the way. I think that's the first time we've done that, isn't it?
Done what?
Lunch boxes for people who are catching cars.
Well,
We're getting more organized. Okay, good.
We're a 9-year-old startup.
I know, 9 years later. Okay.
And that is something. So next year will be our 10th anniversary, right? So it's a big year for us to so hopefully you'll join us. Obviously reach out. We want all you to write for us. Many of you have already. So we'll be reaching out to talk about that. Any feedback, we'll be sending out a poll, and really, thank you again to everyone.
One last thing, along the lines of staying in touch with us, it's come up a number of times in the discussions we've had about the tech platforms and global governance and the internet. There is a community that has kind of coalesced here in an interesting way, and some people say we should try to figure out a way to move it forward together. If you have ideas, you want to do that, stay in touch with me. I'm very eager to facilitate that in any way. All of you who care about that, definitely just stay in touch with me and us, because we all are trying to figure this problem out together. So,
thank you again.
Thank you.